The iron door slammed shut before she opened her eyes. Seraphine heard the bolt slide home. She heard boots on stone, retreating fast, the way men walk when they are afraid of what they have just locked away. She lay on the cold floor of the dungeon cell and stared at the ceiling and did not move. Not because she was weak, because she was thinking. She had been unconscious when they brought her in. She knew this because the last thing she remembered was the courtyard of Lord Aldrich's fallen estate, the smell of smoke, the sound of soldiers shouting at each other in the way soldiers shout when no one has given them a clear order. Someone had wrapped a cloth around her wrists. Someone else had argued about whether she should be bound at all. A third voice, low and very calm, had ended the argument with 4 words: "Lock her away safely." That voice belonged to a king. She knew what kings sounded like. She had spent 12 years in a sorcerer's tower listening to the correspondence of powerful men, reading their letters aloud at her captor's command, learning the exact weight that authority puts in a person's voice. It is not volume, it is not anger, it is the total absence of doubt. That voice in the courtyard had none. It made decisions the way a river makes decisions, which is to say it did not decide at all. It simply moved. The dungeon was cold. She noticed that before she noticed anything else. Cold in a specific way. Not just the absence of warmth, but the presence of stone that had never once in its life been touched by sunlight. The floor under her hands was damp. The air smelled of iron and old water, and something beneath both of those things, something older. The smell of a place that had held fear so long it had become part of the walls. She sat up slowly. The silver fractures on her arms caught the thin light that came from somewhere she could not yet see. They did not glow, they did not pulse, they simply existed on her skin the way old scars exist. Except that they branched, the way lightning branches, the way rivers branch, the way cracks in ancient walls branch when the earth shifts beneath them. They started at her wrists and climbed her forearms and disappeared under her sleeves. She had never been able to see where they ended. She had stopped looking, years ago. The cold was slowing them. That was what she focused on. The cold was slowing their spread, the way cold slows everything, the way winter slows a river until it holds still and goes quiet. In the sorcerer's tower, she had been kept warm, fed well, given clean clothes and clean water, and a room with a view of the mountains. She had been kept like something precious that needed to be maintained in working order. Here, she had a stone floor and no window and a single iron door. Here, her arms were quiet. She thought about that for a long time. There was a small grate at the bottom of the door, not large enough to pass anything through of any real size, but large enough to slide a tin dish underneath. She looked at it. She had not eaten in some time. She was not hungry enough yet for it to matter. That would change, but it had not changed yet, and she was a person who had learned to deal with things when they arrived rather than before. She pressed her back against the far wall and crossed her legs and began to listen. This was what she did. This was the thing that 12 years of captivity had built in her without intending to. Her captor had wanted to make her useful. What he had actually made was a listener. She could hear the structure of a place through its sounds the way a blind person reads the shape of a room by the way sound moves through it. She heard the guards change positions every 4 hours. She heard the drip of water from somewhere above and to the left, which meant the dungeon was not the lowest level, which meant there was at least 1 floor beneath her. She heard the distant, structural sound of a building settling around her, the groan and breath of old stone, and from that, she began to build a picture of how large the castle above her was. Very large. Very old, the kind of building that had been added to over many generations and now existed as a collection of different eras pressed together, each one carrying the ideas of whoever had built it, none of them quite agreeing with the others. She pressed her palm flat against the wall beside her and felt the vibration of it. People were moving, up above her. A great many people. Not the movement of a household going about its day, but the concentrated, purposeful movement of a place under some kind of pressure. A war council, maybe. An emergency of some kind. The guards at her door were a rotation of 2, but the number of bodies she could feel through the wall suggested dozens in the upper levels, all moving with the same urgent direction. Something was happening up there. She filed this information away. On the 3rd day, no one brought food. This was not, she suspected, cruelty. The first 2 days, a dish had appeared through the grate with the mechanical regularity of a routine that someone had written down and assigned. The 3rd day, nothing came, which meant either the routine had been disrupted, or someone had given a new order, or the person responsible for the order had other things on their mind. She had not eaten in 3 days. This was not comfortable, but it was not beyond her. She had learned a long time ago that the body is capable of far more than it announces. What she was more focused on was her fingernail. She had been using it to draw on the wall since the first hour. Not symbols, not messages, a map. She was building a map of the castle above her entirely from sound and vibration and the small logical deductions she could make from what she heard. The position of the water pipes told her where the kitchen was. The weight of the footsteps told her which corridors were used most often. The sound of horses in the distance told her the direction of the stables. She drew on the stone in thin, careful lines, scratching just deep enough to see, not deep enough to make noise. She had drawn maps like this before. In the tower, she had mapped every room she never entered from the sounds that came through the walls. It was the only freedom she had ever been permitted, the freedom to know things about the world without being allowed to touch it. The bolt on the door slid back on the third evening. She did not move. She kept her back against the far wall, and her hands in her lap, and she waited. The door opened. A single candle came first, held by a hand that was not a guard's hand. She could tell this immediately. The guards held their candles at hip height and swept the room with them the way a soldier sweeps a room, looking for threat. This hand held the candle at chest height and did not sweep. It was still. The man who carried it was tall. She could see this even in the limited light of the dungeon. The way the ceiling was not close above him, the way he had to angle slightly to come through the door. He wore dark clothing with no decoration on it that she could see, and he stood just inside the doorway and looked at her and did not speak. She recognized the voice before he used it. She had only heard it say 8 words in the courtyard, but 8 words is enough. 8 words, spoken with that particular quality of someone who has never once in their life had to repeat themselves. She said, without turning her head toward him, "You are the one who is afraid of me." He was quiet for a moment. She could hear his breathing. Slow, controlled. The breathing of someone who practices control the way other people practice sword forms, as a daily discipline, as a way of making sure the body never surprises the mind. "You have not eaten in 3 days, he said. "I noticed," she said. Another silence. He came 2 steps further into the cell. She could hear him looking at the wall where she had been drawing her map. She did not look at him. "What is that?" he said. "Your castle," she said. "Or most of it. I am still uncertain about the northern wing." He was quiet for so long she thought he might have left. Then he said, "You drew that from down here." "Yes." "How?" It was not a question the way most questions are questions. It was a question the way a command is sometimes a question. Short and precise, and expecting a real answer. "I listened," she said. She heard him set something on the floor near the grate. She still did not look at him. Not because she was afraid of what she would see, but because she had learned a long time ago that looking at powerful people directly in the first meeting gives them information they should have to earn. She would look at him when she chose to. He left. The door closed. The bolt slid home again. She looked at what he had left. Twice the food the guards had been sliding through the grate, and a candle. A single candle, set inside the cell, still lit, placed just far enough inside that she could reach it without pressing against the door. She did not use it for light. She sat in the dark with the candle burning and she thought. He had come himself. A king who came himself to check on a prisoner, in the dark, without guards at his back, was not behaving like a man who saw her as simply dangerous and nothing else. He was behaving like a man who was curious. Curiosity was something she knew how to work with. She had been surrounded by curious men her entire life. Her captor had been curious. He had examined her the way scientists examine things they find unusual, with great interest and no consideration of how the thing under examination might feel about it. This king was different in a way she could not yet name. She would name it eventually. She ate half the food and set the rest aside. She kept her hands around the tin dish for a while because it was warm, which surprised her, which meant someone had heated it before bringing it down. She thought about that too. On the 4th morning, the guard slid a blanket through the grate. It was not a guard's blanket. It was too thick. She pressed her face against it once and it smelled of cedar and something underneath cedar. The smell that expensive fabric picks up from the rooms it lives in. The smell of warm stone and candle wax and years of comfortable living. She folded it and sat on it rather than putting it over her shoulders. Her pride, she thought, was possibly getting in the way of her warmth. She unfolded it and put it over her shoulders. Pride was a tool. Tools were for using when useful and setting down when they were not. In the 2nd week she finished the map. She had mapped the whole castle. Every corridor she could hear, every room she could deduce from vibration and sound, every entrance she could locate by the change in the sound of footsteps as people came in from outside. The castle had 3 main gates, a secondary entrance from the stables, and a passage she suspected was used for goods delivery that she had located by the particular sound of heavy carts very early each morning. She had also mapped him. Not the king, specifically. She did not know enough about him to map him yet, but she had mapped his habits. He came to the dungeon every evening between the 6th and 7th hour, which she measured by the change of the guard. He always came alone. He never spoke first. He waited to see if she would speak. Some evenings she did not, and he left after a few minutes. Some evenings she said something, and he answered in a voice that was still controlled but that carried, beneath the control, something she was learning to recognize. He was listening to her the way she listened to buildings, carefully, building a picture. She decided, on the 14th evening, to test this. When the door opened, she said, "The northern wing has a blocked passage behind the third servants' corridor. It was bricked up at some point in the last 30 years, based on the quality of the stone used. Whatever is on the other side has not been accessed since." He stood in the doorway. The candle he carried was the same kind every night, the same height, as if he replaced it each time with an identical one. "Why are you telling me that?" he said. "Because it is your castle," she said, "and you should probably know what is in it." Another long silence. "There is a room back there," he said finally. "It was sealed after my father died. He used it as a study. No one has been in it since." She nodded. She did not look at him. "How did you know it was there at all?" he said. "The sound of the space behind the stone is different from the sound of solid wall," she said. "Once you know what to listen for, you can hear the difference." He was quiet for longer than usual. Then he said, "My name is Alaric." She said nothing. He left. She sat for a long time with his name in the room. She had known he was the king. She had not known his name. She had not asked. Asking would have meant wanting something from him, and she had been extremely careful since the first day not to want anything from him that she had not already decided to want. The food, the blanket, the candle. These were things she had allowed to matter. His name was something else. His name was him saying, "I know you can hear everything. I would rather you hear it from me." It was the first honest thing anyone had said to her in years. She thought about this all through the following morning. She thought about it while she looked at her map on the wall. She thought about it while the fractures on her arms stayed quiet in the cold. On the 15th evening, when the door opened, she turned and looked at him directly for the first time. He was not what she had expected. She was not entirely sure what she had expected. Something colder, maybe. Something that matched the decision to lock her away in a dungeon. He was not cold in appearance. He was tired. Tired in the specific way of someone who has been tired for a very long time and has simply decided to keep going regardless. The way old bridges keep standing, not because they are in perfect condition, but because they have already held this much weight for this long, and stopping seems more difficult than continuing. He met her eyes without flinching. She had expected flinching. Most people, when they first looked directly at her, flinched at something. At the silver on her arms, or at the quality of her attention, or at something they could not name that they felt rather than saw. He did not flinch. He looked at her the way she had looked at his castle, like he was building a picture, like he had been building it for 15 days, and had only just received a piece he had been missing. She said, "My name is Seraphine." He said, "I know." She said, "Then we are even." He left without answering. But she heard, through the door, before his footsteps faded, the sound of him exhaling once, slowly, the way people exhale when they have been holding their breath. She did not smile. She almost did. The cold dungeon pressed around her, and the silver fractures on her arms were silent. And somewhere above her the king who had locked her away was walking back to his castle with her name in his mouth, and a map on his dungeon wall that she had drawn from nothing but the sound of his kingdom. She had been a prisoner her entire life. Cages were not new to her. What was new, and what she turned over in the dark like an unfamiliar coin, was this. The man who had put her in this cage had come down into it himself every night for 15 nights. He had not once asked her for anything. He had not once explained himself. He had only come, and looked, and listened. She pressed her back against the wall and felt the cold of it through the blanket that smelled like his rooms, and she thought, "He is afraid of me." That much she had been right about from the beginning. What she had not been right about was why. She had assumed it was the curse. Everyone was afraid of the curse. But the way he stood in the doorway, the way he held the candle, the way he exhaled on the other side of the door that time, that was not the fear of a man who is afraid of something dangerous. That was the fear of a man who is afraid of something that matters. She filed this away with everything else she knew. Above her, the castle breathed and moved, and carried its many secrets. She had mapped most of them. She would map the rest. And somewhere in the upper floors, a king sat with her name in his thoughts and a decision he had not yet made anywhere in his body except in the fact that he kept coming back. Every single night, he kept coming back. The candle burned down to nothing, and Seraphine did not replace it. She had learned to think better in the dark. The dark took away everything that was not essential, and left only the things that mattered. The sounds, the temperature of the air, the feeling of the stone through her clothes, and the slow, patient work of her own mind. She sat in the absolute darkness of the dungeon cell with her map on the wall behind her, and she began to tell herself the story of how she had arrived here. Not because she was sad about it. She had stopped being sad about it somewhere around the age of 16, when she had finally understood that sadness was not the right response to captivity. The right response was clarity. Sadness blurred things. Clarity sharpened them. She needed everything sharp. Her name was Seraphine. She was 24 years old. She had been taken from her family when she was 12, on a morning in early spring, from a village in the lowlands whose name she still remembered, and whose face she could still see if she closed her eyes and let herself. The particular green of the fields after rain, the sound of the river, the smell of her mother's kitchen. She did not let herself often, not because the memory hurt, exactly, but because it was too whole, too complete, and looking at it directly for too long made everything else feel thin by comparison. The man who had taken her was named Dorian Fell. He was a sorcerer of considerable skill and considerable age, and he had taken her not because of who she was but because of what she was. A person born in the specific configuration of blood and circumstance that made her suitable as a vessel. She was the right age. She was the right blood type. Her family had a trace of old lineage that most people had forgotten and that he had spent 30 years tracking down. He had not been cruel to her. This was something she had had to sit with for a long time, because it was complicated, and complicated things resisted the kind of clean thinking she preferred. He had not been cruel. He had kept her fed and warm and educated. He had taught her to read in 4 languages. He had given her access to his library, which was enormous and covered almost every subject a human mind could concern itself with. He had talked to her, in the evenings, about the nature of curses and the history of magic and the way power moved through the world like water, finding the lowest point, collecting there, becoming something immovable. He had also written a dying curse onto her skin when she was 13, which spread through her body like frost across glass, silver and branching and permanent, and which would have consumed her entirely within a few years if the cold had not slowed it. She had not forgiven him for this. She had understood it, which was different. Understanding was a tool. Forgiveness was a luxury that required a kind of resolution that was not available to her yet. The curse was old. Dorian had not created it. He had inherited it, or rather he had acquired it, the way people acquire diseases, through contact with something that did not belong to them. It had lived in him for a decade, coiled tight, burning him slowly from the inside, and he had needed to move it somewhere else. She had been the somewhere else. The transfer was not something she had agreed to. She had been 13 and she had not been asked. She thought about this sometimes, when the silver on her arms caught the light and the branching pattern of it pressed against her skin like something trying to get out. She thought about what it meant to be chosen for something you did not choose. She thought about what it meant to have your body become a container for someone else's problem. She had thought about it so many times over 11 years that the thinking had worn smooth, the way a stone wears smooth in a river. She could handle the thought now without it catching on anything. She could set it down and pick it up and set it down again. She could do this because she had spent 11 years turning the thinking into action. In the library, she had read everything Dorian owned about curses. She had read it slowly, methodically, starting from the beginning of each text and making notes in a system she had developed herself, on scraps of paper she hid under the loose stone in the corner of her room. She had mapped the curse the same way she mapped buildings, from the inside out, learning its structure, its pressure points, its history, the specific conditions under which it could be moved, divided, interrupted, or ended. By the time she was 18, she knew more about the specific curse that lived in her skin than Dorian did. She had not told him this. She had learned, very early, that information was the only currency she had. Spending it carelessly was the same as being poor. Dorian had died 2 years ago, in a way that was neither her doing nor her design, an illness that found him and took him faster than either of them expected. He had died in his study, in his chair, and she had been in the room, and his last words to her had been not an apology and not an expression of regret, but a question. "What will you do now?" She had said, "I do not know yet." She had been telling the truth. She had spent 2 years after his death in the estate, alone, still in the lowlands, going through his papers and his library with the focused attention of someone who now had access to every room they had previously been locked out of. She had found things, many things. She had added them to her map. Her understanding of the curse deepened until it was less like holding a problem, and more like holding a key that she still needed to find the right lock for. And then Lord Aldrich's men had come, because Aldrich had owned the estate and had not known Dorian was dead, and they had come to collect something Dorian had owed. And they had found her, and they had panicked, the way people panic when they find something they do not understand. And in the chaos of their panic, a king's soldiers had arrived. Because a king's soldiers were always arriving somewhere in those years, the kingdom was in one of its periodic upheavals, and the soldiers had found her in the courtyard, and a voice had said, very calmly, 4 words. And now she was here. She pressed her fingers against the map on the wall. The stone was cold under her fingertips. She traced the outline of the northern wing, the blocked passage behind the 3rd corridor, the sealed room she had told Alaric about. He had known about the room, his father's study, sealed for 30 years, he had said, which meant he had been carrying the sealed room around with him for 30 years, the way people carry rooms they cannot open, keeping the knowledge of them somewhere quiet and heavy in the back of their mind. She understood this. She had spent 11 years mapping the inside of a cage. You learned things about yourself in cages that you could not learn anywhere else. You learned what you would hold on to and what you would let go of. You learned which parts of yourself were essential and which were decoration. You learned that the inside of your own mind was the only territory that was absolutely yours. She had learned, in her cage, that she was someone who would keep thinking, who would keep building, who would keep mapping. She wondered what Alaric had learned in his. Because he had one. That much was clear to her. The kind of stillness he carried was not the stillness of a person who had never been in pain. It was the stillness of a person who had learned to hold pain so still it stopped moving. She knew this quality intimately because she had learned it herself. She did not know yet what had taught it to him. She would, eventually. On the 19th day, something changed. The castle above her changed its rhythm. The movement she could feel through the walls became faster, more concentrated, and she felt the structural vibration of many horses arriving in the courtyard above her, not the regular arrival of a supply train or a messenger. Too many horses, the movement of a group of people who had traveled hard and had arrived with urgency. She pressed her palm to the wall and listened. Raised voices. She could not hear words at this depth, but she could hear the shape of the conversation, the way a disagreement has a different texture from a report, the way anger has a different tempo from fear. This was both. Whoever had arrived had brought news that the castle did not want. She sat with this information. 2 hours later, Alaric came to the dungeon. It was not the 6th hour. It was the middle of the afternoon, and this was the first time in 19 days that he had come at a different time. She heard the difference in his footsteps too. Not faster exactly, but more deliberate. The way a person walks when they are thinking hard about something that has nothing to do with where they are going. He opened the door and stood in the doorway and held the candle and looked at her. She looked back at him. She had been looking at him directly since the 15th evening. She had decided by then that she had gathered enough from not looking. Something has arrived, she said. He was quiet for a moment. News from the eastern border. She nodded. She did not ask what the news was. If he wanted her to know, he would tell her. If he did not tell her, she would hear about it through the walls eventually. He stood in the doorway for longer than usual. She watched his face in the candlelight. He was not a man who showed things easily. She had come to understand this over 19 evenings of watching him stand in doorways. His face was like his castle, old and structural and built to hold weight, without showing the effort. But candlelight was honest. Candlelight showed what daylight hid. He looked tired, not the ordinary tiredness she had noticed before, something underneath that. Your curse, he said, does it cause you pain? She considered the question. Not right now, she said, the cold slows it. If it were warmer. If it were warmer, it would spread faster. He looked at the silver on her arms. She did not pull her sleeves down. She had not been hiding the fractures since the 2nd evening. Hiding them seemed dishonest in a way that the darkness of the dungeon made unnecessary. I was told, he said carefully, that cursed vessels are in pain constantly. Whoever told you that was speaking generally, she said. I am a specific case. He seemed to absorb this. Is there an ending to it? He said. This was the most direct question he had asked her about the curse in 19 days. She thought about whether to answer it honestly, and decided that dishonesty at this point would cost more than honesty. Yes, she said. What is it? That, she said, is more complicated. He waited. She said, the curse has conditions, not for ending it, for how it ends. It is not something that can simply be removed the way you remove a splinter. It has to complete itself, or be redirected, or be interrupted at a specific point in its cycle. I have been studying those conditions for 11 years. 11 years. Since I was 13. He looked at her for a long time. The candle between them threw his shadow long and thin against the dungeon wall. She thought, not for the first time, that he had the look of someone who wanted to ask a question they had not yet decided was fair to ask. "Why not leave?" he said finally. "After the sorcerer died, you were free." "I was not free," she said. "I was alone in a building that had belonged to someone else, and I had work to finish." "The curse. The curse," she confirmed. "And now you are here." "And now I am here," she agreed. He was quiet again. She listened to him think. She had gotten quite good at hearing the texture of his silences. Some of them were decision silences. Some of them were information processing silences. This one was something she had not quite identified yet. "I will have blankets sent down," he said. "Warmer ones." She said nothing. "And wood for a fire, if the ventilation allows it." "The ventilation is adequate," she said. "The shaft is in the northwest corner." He looked at the northwest corner of the cell, then back at her, with the expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that arrived when she said something that demonstrated how much she had already mapped. He left. She looked at the candle he had left her again. A different kind this time, thicker, the kind that lasts 2 days rather than 1. She thought about the question he had asked. Why not leave? It was a question that assumed leaving was the same as freedom. She had learned, very specifically, that these were different things. You could leave a place and still carry it with you. You could walk out of a door and find that the door had moved inside you and was still closed. The sorcerer's tower was still inside her. She was still mapping her way out of it. This dungeon was the most physically confining place she had been since the tower, and yet the man who kept it was not the man who had brought her here. He was something else, something she did not have the right word for yet. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Above her, the castle held its breath over whatever news had arrived from the eastern border. She felt the weight of it through the stone, all that collective anxiety pressing down through the floors and the walls, and finding her here at the bottom of it, perfectly still, perfectly quiet, thinking. Her arms were silent. The cold held the fractures still. She let herself, just for a moment, feel the specific texture of this cell, the stone, the dark, the sounds of the castle above her. And she noticed that somewhere in the last few days, without deciding to, she had stopped feeling afraid of what would happen next. She was not sure what had replaced it. She was not sure yet if that was good. But she sat with it in the dark and she did not push it away, and the candle burned steadily in the northwest corner near the ventilation shaft, and the silver on her arms did not move. 3 days after the arrival of the Eastern news, one of the guards changed. This was not unusual. Guards rotated on a regular schedule, and she had mapped the rotation over the first 2 weeks, until it was as familiar to her as the map on the wall. But this change was different. The new guard was not a replacement. He was an addition. There were now 3 men outside her door where there had been 2, and the third man walked differently from the others, not the trained regularity of a castle guard, but the looser, more variable movement of someone who had spent a long time moving through difficult country. A soldier recently returned from somewhere. She pressed her palm to the door and listened. For 3 days, she heard nothing specific, but the quality of the castle's anxiety did not lessen. It settled in, the way a storm settles in rather than passing, becoming part of the daily weather rather than an interruption of it. She could feel it in the change in the guard conversations, which became shorter. She could feel it in the way Alaric's footsteps changed in the evenings, still controlled, still deliberate, but carrying a new weight that she had not heard before. Something was wrong with him. She did not say this on the first evening she noticed it. She waited 3 more evenings to be sure she was not misreading. She listened to his breathing, which was her best instrument for his internal state, because his voice was always controlled, and his footsteps were always controlled, and his face was mostly controlled, but his breathing was harder to manage. It had been slow and deep every evening for the first 3 weeks. Now there was something underneath it, a tightness, a quality that was not quite a tremor but was in the territory of one. On the 26th evening she said, "You are unwell." He stood in the doorway with the candle. "I am fine," he said, the way people say they are fine when they are speaking to someone they have not yet decided to trust with the real answer. She said nothing else. She let the silence do what silence does. After a long pause he said, "It is not serious." "That is what people say when they are not sure whether it is serious," she said. Another silence. The candle flame did not move. The air in the dungeon was very still at this hour. He said, "It will pass." She looked at his hands where they held the candle. He was wearing gloves. He had not worn gloves on any of the previous 25 evenings. The dungeon was cold, but not so cold that gloves were necessary for a king who had presumably spent time in actual cold. The gloves were to hide something. She did not say this. She said, "I have a library in my head, 11 years of reading. If you want to tell me what is wrong, I may have something useful." He looked at her for a long moment. "Good night," he said, and left. But she noticed, the next evening, that he had left the gloves off. His hands in the candlelight were ordinary hands. She looked at them the way she looked at everything, carefully, without appearing to look at them. She saw nothing wrong. He kept them still, the way he kept everything still, and nothing on the surface of them showed her what she was looking for. She looked at his face instead. His face showed her what she needed. Not the eyes, not the set of his jaw, but the area around his eyes, which held the particular compressed look of someone who is experiencing discomfort and refusing to acknowledge it. She said, "How long?" He did not ask her what she meant. 2 weeks, he said. She filed this away. 2 weeks before today, which was 3 days after the Eastern news arrived, which meant the timing was not coincidental. She thought about this for the rest of the night. The blood appeared on Alaric's hands for the first time on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of autumn. He woke before dawn, as he always did, and dressed in the dark, as he always did, and reached for the water basin on the table beside his bed, and his hands were already red. Not from a wound. There was no wound. The skin was intact. The blood simply appeared the way dew appears, gathered overnight from somewhere that was not the surface of the skin but from something beneath it, something that had decided it no longer wanted to stay inside. He stood in the dark room and looked at his hands. He had been king for 11 years. He had seen wounds. He had carried wounds. He was not a man who was easily frightened by blood, but this was different in a way that was hard to name cleanly. This was blood that did not belong to any injury he had taken. This was his body producing it without being asked to, the way a wound produces blood but without the wound. He washed his hands carefully. He dressed. He went to the morning war council and said nothing about it. He had 4 physicians in the castle. He did not summon any of them that morning, or the next morning, or the morning after that. He washed his hands each day before anyone could see, and he kept the information very still inside himself. In the same place he kept other things he was not ready to examine. He had a great deal of storage in that place. He had been putting things there for 11 years. On the 5th morning, the blood was worse. It was no longer only on his hands, his throat, his wrists, the thin skin at his temples. He stood before the mirror in his chamber and looked at himself and thought, "This is past the point of waiting." He called the senior physician. Her name was Cora Wells, and she had been a physician in the castle since before Alaric was born. She was 70 years old, and had the manner of someone who had spent 7 decades refusing to be surprised by the human body. She examined him without speaking, with the complete focused attention of a person who was reading something complex in a language they knew well. Then she was quiet for a long time. "Tell me what you know about this," Alaric said. "Not enough," she said. "Not yet." He trusted her precisely because she said things like that. She was not a physician who filled the spaces of her uncertainty with confident words. She filled them with more work. She came back 3 days later with a name, wolf blood sickness. It was not common. She had seen it once before, 30 years ago, in a different kingdom, in a different Alpha King, and that man had died within the year. She told Alaric this without softening it, which he respected. "What causes it?" he said. "Extreme strain," she said carefully. "In Alpha Kings, the blood is already under pressures that common blood does not carry. Prolonged strain can cause it to become unstable. It begins to reject the body that contains it. And the treatment?" She was quiet in the way she was quiet when she had information she had not yet decided how to deliver. "Tell me," he said. "There is a recorded suppressant," she said, "in the old medical texts. It is not a cure. It suppresses the progression and buys time for the body to stabilize. What is it?" "The blood of a cursed vessel," she said. He looked at her for a long time. "Specifically," she continued very carefully, watching his face, "the blood of a living person who carries a dormant or suppressed curse. The interaction between the 2 bloods seems to create a stabilizing effect. The records are not entirely clear on the mechanism. They are very clear on the outcome." He stood up from the chair he had been sitting in. He walked to the window. The castle grounds were visible from here, the training yard, the stables, the kitchen gardens, all of it going about the ordinary business of a day. Everything outside perfectly ordinary, everything inside this room rearranging itself. "How long," he said, "before it becomes critical?" 3 months, she said. "Perhaps 4 if you rest." He turned from the window. "I will need time to think about this," he said. She left. He stood in the empty room and thought about the girl in his dungeon. He had not told Seraphine what was wrong. He had not told anyone what was wrong except Cora, and Cora he had told because he had no choice. He was a man who carried his problems in a particular internal silence, a silence that had developed over many years of being the person other people brought their problems to. There was no one he brought his own problems to. There was no one who existed in that position in his life. He thought about how this had come to be. He thought about his queen. He did not think about her often, because thinking about her was like walking into a room that had been sealed and finding that the air inside had gone bad. He could walk in, but the breathing was hard. She had died 4 years ago, a fast illness, the kind that announces itself already advanced, and she had been gone within 3 weeks of the first sign. They had been 6 years married. She had been kind in a way that was unusual for the position, not a performative kindness but a genuine one, the kind that made rooms feel larger. He had sealed her room. He had sealed her rooms in himself. He had kept going. He had 11 years of being king and 4 years of being a king whose queen was gone, and he had decided, not all at once but incrementally, that keeping going was the only thing available to him. Now his blood was rejecting his body. He thought about that. He thought about Seraphine in the dungeon, who had drawn his entire castle on the wall from nothing but sound, who had told him things about his own home that he had not known, who looked at him in the evenings with the eyes of someone who was learning a language they would eventually become fluent in. He had put her there. He had put her there because the sight of her in the courtyard, silver-marked and unconscious and clearly carrying something ancient and dangerous, had reached into the specific place inside him where his worst fear lived, and had grabbed it. He had locked away the fear. The girl had come with it. He knew this. He had known it then. He had locked away the fear, and sent food and a blanket and a better candle, and come down himself every evening to look at what he had done, because looking at it was the only honest thing he had left. Now the thing he needed was inside that same dungeon. He pressed his hands flat against the windowsill. He thought about what kind of man he was. The kind who locked a girl in a dungeon because she frightened him. The kind who came to look at her every night because something about her stillness and her intelligence and the way she drew maps in the dark had gotten inside the sealed rooms of him and refused to sit quietly. The kind who now needed to walk back down those stairs and say, "I locked you here, and now I need something from you." He had been afraid of very few things in his life. He was afraid of this conversation. He went down the stairs. He went down alone, as he always did. He slid the bolt back. He opened the door. She was sitting in the position she always sat in, back against the wall, hands in her lap, the thick candle he had sent burning in the corner. The map covered almost the entire wall behind her now. It was extraordinary. He had been looking at it every evening, and it was still extraordinary. She had added to it in the last few days. She had found the kitchen gardens. She looked at him. She had been looking at him directly for some time now. He had adjusted to this. He found, unexpectedly, that he had come to prefer it. There was something about being looked at clearly that was easier than being looked at sideways. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. He sat down on the floor. He had not done this before. He had always stood in the doorway. He sat down with his back against the wall beside the door, his legs in front of him, and he set the candle on the floor between them, and he looked at it instead of at her. "I am unwell," he said, in a specific way. She said nothing. He felt her listening. "It is a condition called wolf blood sickness," he said. "It is rare. It occurs in alpha kings under extreme strain. My blood is becoming unstable. It rejects the body." Still nothing from her. "My physician tells me there is a suppressant," he said, "in the medical records." He stopped. The candle flame was perfectly still. "The blood of a cursed vessel," she said. He looked at her. Her expression had not changed. She was looking at him with the same attention she always looked at him with. He realized, with a small shock, that she was not surprised. "You knew," he said. "I suspected," she said. "3 days after the Eastern news arrived, your breathing changed, and you started wearing gloves." He stared at her. "You listened to my breathing," he said. "I listened to everything," she said. He sat with this. "And you said nothing," he said. "It was not my information to give," she said. "It was yours." He looked at the candle again. The flame had still not moved. The air was very still between them. "I am asking you," he said. "I am not ordering you. I want to be clear about that distinction." I heard the distinction, she said. Will you help me? He said. The words sat strangely in his mouth. He was not practiced at asking. He had been giving orders and making decisions for so long that the simple act of asking for something felt like learning to use a hand he had injured years ago, careful and slightly unfamiliar. She looked at him for a long time. How much blood does your physician need? She said. He told her. She nodded. And then she said the thing that landed in him, and did not move for the rest of that night. You could have asked me the night you locked me in here. I would have said yes then too. He started to say something. She said, I am not angry at you for being afraid of me. I am angry at you for not thinking I deserve to choose. He had no answer for this. He had no counter-argument. He had no diplomatic distance available. He was sitting on the floor of his own dungeon, and she was right and he was wrong, and the distance between where he had been standing, on the night he locked her away, and where he was sitting now, was measurable in something larger than days. He said, I know. She said nothing. The flame between them burned steady and small. He put his hand in his pocket and felt the iron key he had been carrying since the night he locked her in. He had given a copy to the dungeon warden. He had kept the original himself, not because it was necessary, but because he had not examined yet why he was keeping it. He took it out of his pocket and set it on the floor between them. He did not say anything about it. He did not pick it up. He left it there between the candle and the wall. She looked at it. He stood up. I will send Cora Wells to you tomorrow, he said. She is my physician. She is trustworthy. All right, she said. He went to the door. He went through it. He pulled it closed. He did not bolt it. He stood on the other side of the door and looked at the unbolted lock and made a decision about who he was going to be from now forward. He walked up the stairs with both hands at his sides, and his hands were red again, and he did not put his gloves on. Behind him in the dungeon, she sat with the iron key on the floor in front of her, and the map of his castle on the wall behind her, and the quiet candle burning. She did not pick up the key. She sat with it. The weight of being right and the weight of being fair were not always the same weight, and she was old enough to know the difference. She had every right to be furious. She had enough clarity to understand that fury, at this particular moment, would close the only door that had ever opened. She folded her hands in her lap and she let herself feel both things at once, the anger and the something else that was harder to name. And above her, the castle held its breath, and a king climbed his own stairs with his hands ungloved and his decision made, and the season turned, and the cold outside deepened, and for the first time in 11 years, someone had come to her in the dark and asked. Not ordered. Asked. Cora Wells came the next morning. She was not what Seraphine had expected. She had expected a physician in the formal mold, brisk and professional and asking only the questions her work required. What arrived was an older woman who walked into the dungeon cell, looked at the map on the wall for a full 30 seconds before saying a single word, and then said, He told me you drew that from down here. Yes, Seraphine said. Good grief, said Cora Wells, and set down her bag. She was thorough. She examined Seraphine the way Seraphine examined buildings, from the outside in, noting everything, missing nothing. She looked at the silver fractures with an attention that was not afraid, only curious. I have read about this, Cora said, but I have never seen it. Most people have not, Seraphine said. Does it hurt? Not in the cold. Cora made a note in the small journal she had brought, and in warmth. It presses, like something trying to find more room. Cora looked up at her. And yet you stayed in the cold estate for 2 years after the sorcerer died. You did not go south. No, Seraphine said. Because you were not finished. Because I was not finished, she confirmed. Cora nodded, as if this was the most sensible thing anyone had said to her in recent memory. She opened a small case and removed the instruments she needed, a thin lancet and a glass vial, both of them very clean. I will take as little as the king's situation allows, Cora said. I want you to understand that the amount matters, too little, and the treatment does not hold. Too much, and it weakens you without cause. How much do you think you need? For the first treatment, a small vial. I will know more after. Seraphine held out her arm. The silver on it caught the light of the 2 candles now burning in the cell. She watched Cora's hands, which were steady. She liked hands that were steady. It told her a great deal about the person they belonged to. The blood came easily. Seraphine had expected pain and there was almost none, only the thin, clean sensation of a careful cut. Cora pressed a cloth to the place and held it there. Has he told you what he plans to do? Seraphine said. About what? About me. After. Cora looked at her steadily. He has not. Seraphine nodded. What would you like him to do? Cora said. It was a simple question. It was not, in Seraphine's experience, a question she was asked often. People generally decided what they were going to do with her without consulting her preferences. She thought about it. I would like a window, she said, and I would like to know what is in the library. Cora looked at her for a moment. I will pass that along, she said. She repacked her case and picked up the small sealed vial. At the door, she stopped. I have served this king for 11 years, she said. I served his father before him. I have seen Alaric make many decisions, not all of them right, but I have never once seen him make a decision he did not then have to live inside. She said this as if it were simply information, not a reassurance, not a warning, just a fact. Seraphine sat with it after she left. She thought about what it meant to live inside a decision. She thought about the dungeon. She thought about the sealed rooms in him that she could hear in the evenings through the particular quality of his silences. She thought about the iron key, which was still on the floor where he had placed it, and which she had still not touched. She looked at the key. She picked it up. She did not use it to open the door. She simply held it. It was heavier than she had expected. Iron always was. People thought of iron as the simple metal, the common one, but it was never light. It carried its own weight honestly. She respected that. She set it on the ledge near the ventilation shaft, where she could see it in the light of the candle. Then she turned back to the wall and added to the map. She had not yet been able to locate the library. She was beginning to think it was somewhere she could not hear easily, somewhere in the interior of the castle, not against an outer wall, surrounded by rooms that absorbed sound rather than transmitting it. A room that was quiet, because it was meant to be. She pressed her palm flat against the stone and listened. Somewhere above her, the castle was going on with its day, and somewhere in the middle of it, a man was being given a vial of her blood by a physician who trusted him, and he was going to have to decide what he was going to do about all of it. She thought he would do the right thing. She was not certain. She had not yet decided to be certain about him. But she thought so. Cora Wells administered the first treatment at noon. She mixed the blood into a compound she had prepared from the old records, added 2 herbal elements she had researched overnight, and gave it to Alaric in his study with the door closed. He drank it without ceremony. He thanked her. He asked her to leave and let him know if there were changes within the hour. The changes came in 40 minutes. It was not dramatic. He had been braced for something dramatic. What he felt instead was quiet, the way a room becomes quiet when a noise you had stopped noticing finally stops. The tightness that had been living in his hands for 3 weeks, the pressure that had been building beneath his skin, simply began to ease. It did not vanish. It stepped back, like something giving ground. He sat in his study and let himself feel this and did not rush to interpret it. He had made a choice, downstairs in the dungeon, when he set the key on the floor and walked out without bolting the door. He had made it with full knowledge of what it was. He was choosing to stop treating Seraphine as a problem and start treating her as a person he had wronged. These were not the same thing, and pretending they were would have been comfortable in the short term and dishonest in the long term. And he had decided, at some point in the last several weeks of going down those stairs every evening, that dishonesty was no longer something he was willing to practice in that dungeon. He had spent 3 weeks being dishonest to himself about why he went down there. He had told himself it was monitoring, keeping an eye on a potentially dangerous situation, being responsible about a decision he had already made. This was not why he went. He went because she was the most interesting person he had encountered in 11 years. And because she talked to him as if she expected him to be able to handle the truth, and because that was something no one had done in a very long time. People talked to kings carefully. They selected their words with the precision of people walking through a room where things are breakable. She talked to him like someone who assumed the furniture was fine and moved normally through the space. He had not known how much he had missed that until it was in front of him in a dungeon. He ordered a set of quarters prepared in the lower castle. Not the dungeon, but not the main halls either. A room with a window as she had apparently requested. 3 rooms actually, connected, with a small sitting area and a proper bed. He ordered books sent from the library. He did not ask which ones she preferred because he did not know, and was not yet sure he should assume. He sent a selection. He went down to the dungeon in the late afternoon, not the evening, because he wanted to tell her himself rather than have it delivered as instruction through a guard. She was at the wall. She had been adding to the map again. She turned when he came in. The treatment is working, he said. She looked at him with the careful attention she always applied to him, the look that was building a picture piece by piece. Good, she said. I have had quarters prepared, he said. In the lower castle you will have a window and access to a selection of books. Cora will come to you once a week. She was quiet for a moment. "Am I free to leave the quarters?" she said. He had been expecting this question and had spent the morning thinking about it. "The lower castle," he said. "For now, until we have a better understanding of your situation and the risks involved." She said nothing. "I know that is not. It is more than this," she said, looking around the dungeon cell. "I understand why you are cautious. I would be cautious too if I were you. And I had a person with a live curse in my castle. I am not arguing with it." He looked at her. "You are accepting it," he said. "That is different." "Yes," she said. He was not certain what to do with this. He had braced for argument, for the kind of negotiation he was practiced at. He had not braced for simply being heard and understood. "The map," he said, looking at the wall. "Can I have it copied before we prepare this cell for other use?" She looked at the wall. He could see her thinking about this, which meant she was thinking about what it meant for him to want a copy. What information that gave away about him. "No," she said, "but I will draw you a new one. A better one, now that I know more." He said, "When you are ready." She said, "I am ready now." He looked at her. "I have been ready for 27 days, she said. Not accusatory, factual. He held that. "Then I will have you moved today," he said. She stood up and gathered the two things she had. The blanket that smelled like his room's, folded carefully. The candle, burned down to a stub. She held these and looked around the dungeon cell one last time. She looked at the map. He watched her look at it. He watched her look at 11 years of thinking turned into lines on a stone wall. Everything she had built in the dark from nothing but sound and logic and the kind of patience that is not passive but active. Patient the way a hunter is patient, still on the outside and utterly focused on the inside. She turned away from it. She walked out of the dungeon door without looking back. He followed her. The lower castle quarters had been prepared in haste, but prepared well. The window faced west, which meant she would have afternoon light. The books were stacked on a table near it. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the room. He waited. She walked to the window and looked out. He stayed in the doorway. He watched her see, for the first time, the real exterior of the castle she had mapped from the inside. He could not see her expression. He could only see the line of her shoulders, which were not relaxed and not tense but somewhere in between. The posture of someone receiving a great deal of information at once and processing it quietly. "The kitchen gardens are further south than I thought," she said. "Yes," he said. "And the stables are larger. We keep 60 horses." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you." He did not know if she was thanking him for the room, or the window, or the books, or for something larger and less specific. He chose not to ask. He said, "The lock on the door will not be bolted from the outside. You can lock it from the inside if you choose." She turned from the window and looked at him. "And the lower castle?" "The lower castle is open to you. The main halls, not yet. I want to introduce that gradually, for both our sakes." She nodded. "That is fair," she said. He turned to leave. She said, "Alaric." He stopped. She said, "When the treatment is working well and the sickness is stable, I want to talk to you about the curse, about what I found in the sorcerer's papers. There are things you should probably know." He turned back. "Why?" he said. "Because," she said, "the curse is not only mine, and knowing what I know might matter to you." He held this. "When you are ready," he said. "I am ready now," she said, for the second time that day. And for the second time, he found he had no counter-argument. He came in. He closed the door behind him. He sat in the chair by the empty fireplace. She sat across from him, near the window, with the afternoon light coming through it and the silver on her arms very visible and very quiet. She told him about Dorian Fell. She told him about the tower and the library and the 11 years of reading, and she told him the shape of the curse, its history and its structure, and the 3 conditions under which it could be ended or transferred or interrupted. She did not tell him everything. She told him what was relevant. She was economical with information and generous with truth, and he understood the difference by now. He listened. He listened the way she listened to buildings, building a picture. When she finished, the afternoon light had shifted to early evening and the candle near the window had burned down considerably. He said, "You have known all of this for years." "Since I was 20, she said, roughly. "And you told no one." "There was no one to tell," she said. "And information spent carelessly is the same as being poor." He looked at her. "You heard that from Dorian," he said. "I improved on it," she said. "He said knowledge is currency. I refined the thinking." He almost smiled. He was aware of it happening and almost let it through, and then it passed. "What are the 3 conditions?" he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "The first is complete transfer to another vessel, willing or unwilling." "I will not do that." "No," he said, "obviously not." "The second is natural completion. The curse runs its full cycle and burns itself out. This takes 50 years and I would not survive it." "And the third?" She looked at the window. The light was going. "The third requires someone who can hold the knowledge of the curse without it claiming them. Not a vessel, a witness. Someone whose blood is strong enough to stabilize against the curse's pressure without absorbing it." She paused. "Wolf blood," she said. "Alpha King blood." He was very still. She looked at him. "The treatments," she said. "Cora's treatments. They are not only suppressing your sickness." She paused. "They are also slowing the curse's progression in me. The interaction between the bloods is doing something in both directions." He said nothing. "I did not know this would happen," she said. "I knew it was theoretically possible. It is in the old texts. But I did not know the progression would be this fast." He said, "How fast?" She said, "If the treatments continue, there is a possibility, not a certainty, that within a year, the curse could reach its interruption point. And be ended." "And be ended," she confirmed. "With no transfer, no 50-year burn. Simply ended." He sat in the chair with this information. He thought about the dungeon. He thought about 27 days of going down those stairs. He thought about the key on the floor, and the map on the wall, and the conversation he had just had in this room, and the one he had had on the dungeon floor when he finally sat down instead of standing in the doorway. He thought about what it meant that the answer to her curse and the treatment for his sickness were the same thing, that they were, between them, holding the solution to each other's problem, that this had been true on the night he locked her in the dungeon, and he had not known. He thought about what she had said that night. "You could have asked me the first night. I would have said yes then too." "Why are you telling me this now?" he said. She looked at him. "Because," she said, very simply, "you came down and sat on the floor." He said nothing. "Men who lock people in dungeons do not sit on the floor," she said. "They stand in doorways. You sat on the floor. That is a different thing." He looked at the window where the evening was coming in, the first stars just becoming visible, the kind of early autumn sky that was still holding some warmth in its color even as the cold came. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "Yes," she said, "you do. I will think about how to pay it." "I know you will," she said. And she said it not as flattery, not as reassurance, but as a simple observed fact, the way she said everything, with the weight of someone who had spent years learning the difference between what things sounded like and what they were. He stood up. He went to the door. She said, "The books, the third one from the left, that one first." He looked at the stack of books. He did not ask how she had already ranked them without reading the titles. He simply trusted that she had. He left her with the evening light coming through the window, and the books on the table, and the door that could only be locked from the inside. He walked up the stairs to the main castle. His hands did not bleed. In the following days, the lower castle became her territory. She moved through it with the specific attention of someone mapping a new space, not on paper this time but in her body, in her feet, learning the distances by walking them, learning the turns by making them. The lower castle was older than the upper floors, built first, built heavy, with ceilings that were lower, and walls that were thicker, and corridors that felt like the castle was thinking about you as you moved through them. She found the library. It was not where she had placed it on the map. It was tucked behind a false assumption she had made about the East Corridor, a corridor she had heard as empty, that was actually a service passage running parallel to the real space. She stood in the doorway of the library on the third morning and looked at what she had spent 27 dungeon days searching for, and felt something she recognized as a kind of homecoming, which was strange because she had never been here before. The library was large and very quiet. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with books, organized in a system that was not alphabetical or by topic but by something else entirely, a system she could not immediately decode. She would decode it. She walked in and ran her hand along the spines of the books on the nearest shelf and let herself feel, for just a moment, what it was to be in a room full of knowledge that she had not yet absorbed. She had been in Dorian's library 11 years. She had read most of it. This was different. This was not a captive's library, offered by someone who controlled her access to it. This was a king's library, and the king had told her she had access to the lower castle, and the library was in the lower castle, and no one had told her not to. She pulled the first book that interested her and sat down in the chair nearest the window. Two guards passed in the corridor outside. One of them glanced in. She looked up and met his eyes, and he looked away first, which told her something useful about how the castle had absorbed the news of her presence in the lower floors. She went back to her book. On the fourth day, she left a candle burning on the table near the large chair in the corner of the library. Not the chair she used, the chair that caught the most light from the east window in the early morning, the chair that was, she had observed, the one where the most recent books had been left half open, marked with slips of paper. She did not tell him she had left it, she just left it. On the fifth morning, she came in early, and the candle had been burned down to a stub, and the book left beside her, previous night's reading, had been moved 2 shelves to the right. She looked at it. She pulled it from the shelf. It was a text on the history of Alpha bloodlines, specifically the northern lineages, written 300 years ago by a scholar who had had access to records that no longer existed. She had not been able to find it in Dorian's library. She had not known it existed. She sat down in the chair that was not the chair with the book slips in it, and read for the next 4 hours without stopping. That evening, when Alaric came to the lower castle to ask about the treatment, which had become a brief and practical exchange that Cora usually facilitated, Seraphine said nothing about the book. But she moved the candle to his chair, and she left 3 books beside it, stacked, with a small folded note on top. The note said, "These follow on from the bloodline history, in this order." She did not sign it. She did not need to. This was how they built it, the 2 of them, in the weeks that followed. Not through declarations, not through conversations that named what they were doing, through books moved and candles left, and small precise gifts of information, the only currency she had ever had, and the language she was most fluent in. He read what she left. She knew because the books were always returned to different shelves from where she had found them, always organized into a new pattern, his system overlaying hers, both of them decoding the library's original order and building a shared understanding of it. She found his system eventually. It was chronological, but not by publication date, by the date he had read each book, going back 20 years, the entire span of his adult life encoded in the arrangement of the shelves. She stood in front of a section and understood, suddenly, that she was looking at him at 18, what had interested him then, what he had been trying to understand, then at 22, then at 29, when the books became darker and more structural, the books of a man who had recently taken on more weight than he had expected. Then, 4 years ago, a gap, a section of the shelf that had not been added to. She looked at the gap for a long time. She did not touch anything on that shelf. She turned away and went back to her chair and read her book and felt, in the quiet of the library, the specific weight of what the gap meant and how long he had been carrying it. She thought about what he had said in the dungeon, that first evening he had come in and sat on the floor. "I owe you more than an apology. I will think about how to pay it." She thought about what she had said in return. She thought about the question Cora had asked her. What would you like him to do? "A window," she had said. "Books." She had not said what she actually wanted. She did not know yet if she was allowed to want it. She did not know yet if what she wanted was wise or reckless or somewhere in between. She wanted to be the person who could tell him what the gap in the shelf meant. She wanted to be the person he would let into the sealed room. She thought about this for a long time. Then she turned the page and kept reading, because there was still a great deal she needed to know before she could be useful to anyone, including herself. 6 weeks after Seraphine moved from the dungeon to the lower castle quarters, she began appearing in Alaric's dreams. Not as herself exactly, more as a quality of attention, a specific kind of listening that belonged to her in the waking world and that had, apparently, begun following him into sleep. He would be in a dream, moving through some version of the castle that was not quite the castle, and he would feel the sense of being precisely and completely heard, and he would know she was there without being able to see her, and he would wake up and lie in the dark for a while, feeling the shape of the absence left by the dream. He did not examine this too closely. He had a kingdom to run. He had a war on the eastern border that was not quite a war, but was accumulating the specific texture of one. He had a council that was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the question of the woman in the lower castle and what she was doing there. He dealt with these things one at a time, as he always had. The council question was the most pressing. It arrived in the form of a formal written query from Lord Crane, the oldest and most senior of his advisors, a man of considerable intelligence and considerable discomfort with anything that did not fit into categories he had already approved. The query was politely worded. It asked for clarification on the status of the young woman currently residing in the castle's lower quarters, specifically regarding the nature of her residence and her purpose. Alaric read it twice. He He called Crane to his study. Crane was 73 and wore his age with the dignity of someone who had decided that age was an argument worth making. He came in and sat across from Alaric's desk and folded his hands and waited with the patience of a man who had outlasted several crises by simply remaining still long enough for them to sort themselves out. "She is under my protection," Alaric said. "She is a cursed vessel, my lord. She is a person who carries a curse she did not choose. That is different." Crane looked at him. "With respect, the distinction may not be immediately apparent to the council." "Then help me make it apparent," Alaric said. "The council's concern," Crane said carefully, "is that a cursed person in the castle represents a risk that has not been formally assessed or managed." "It has been managed," Alaric said. "By me. Under the advice of my physician, the situation is stable. They are also concerned," Crane continued, in the tone of someone who has saved the harder thing for second, "about the frequency of your visits to the lower castle." Alaric was quiet. "It has been observed," Crane said. "Most things I do are observed," Alaric said. "That is the nature of being a king." "Yes," Crane said. "And so what is observed becomes what is discussed, and what is discussed becomes what is believed. And what is believed has consequences." This was true. Alaric had known it was true from the beginning. He had not found a way to make it not true, and he had not found a way to make himself stop going to the lower castle in the evenings. "What would you have me do?" he said. Crane said, "Formalize it." "How?" "Give her a position, a title, a role in the castle that explains her presence in a language the council can understand. Something with defined duties and defined limitations." "She is not a servant," Alaric said. "No," Crane said. "She is not. I am not suggesting she should be treated as one. I am suggesting that ambiguity is your enemy here, and clarity, even imperfect clarity, is your ally." Alaric sat with this. "Give me a week," he said. Crane went. Alaric sat at his desk and looked out the window at the autumn sky, and thought about Seraphine and what she would make of the suggestion. He could hear, in his imagination, the quality of the silence she would use to receive it. He could almost predict the specific angle she would tilt her head and what words she would choose when she finally responded. He noticed that he could do this, and filed it away. He went to the lower castle that evening. She was in the library. She was almost always in the library in the evenings now. He had begun to find this reliable in a way that he had not named but that existed in his days as a kind of structural fact, the way certain things are structurally reliable, the rising of the sun, the direction of the river. Seraphine in the library at this hour. She looked up when he came in. He told her about the council's concern. He told her about Crane's suggestion. He told her these things directly, without diplomacy, because he had found that the diplomatic version always contained gaps that she filled in immediately and accurately, and the exercise was therefore pointless. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "What kind of position?" "That is what I am trying to decide," he said. "What role does the castle actually need that I could fill?" He looked at her. This was the question of someone who had spent 11 years making themselves useful as a survival strategy. She was not asking what role she could pretend to fill. She was asking what she was actually good at that the castle actually needed. "You have read most of the library," he said. "A significant portion," she said. "You have more knowledge of curse pathology and magical history than anyone in the kingdom, almost certainly." "Yes. You have an ability to gather information and deduce structures that I have not seen matched." She said nothing to this. She had learned, he had noticed, not to fill in the spaces where he was building toward something. "Scholar," he said, "not a servant role, a formal scholarly position. You advise on matters of magical history and related topics. It gives you a defined purpose and a defined presence." She was quiet. "It is honest," she said. "It is," he said. "It does not require me to pretend to be less than I am." "No," he said. "It requires you to be exactly what you are, formally." She thought about this for a long time. He waited. "There will still be people who object," she said. "Yes. The objection will not be about the role." "No," he said. "The objection will be about you. There is no title that changes that. The title is for the council's comfort. It is a language they understand." She looked at him. "And for yours," she said. He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "Honestly, yes. It makes this easier to defend." She appreciated the honesty. He could see it in the way she released something slightly in her expression, not much. She was always precise with her expressions, but enough to see. "All right," she said. He nodded. She said, "Then I want access to the main castle library, the one upstairs." He looked at her. It is the logical next step, she said. If I am a formal scholar, I should have access to the full collection. The lower library has significant gaps. The medical history section is incomplete, and the section on northern bloodlines has been pulled apart. He knew the section on northern bloodlines had been pulled apart because he had pulled it apart himself, over many years of reading, and had not put it back together in a way that made immediate sense to anyone who was not him. The main library, he said. The main library, she said. He thought about it. Next week, he said. Tomorrow, she said. He almost smiled again. This time he let a little of it through. The day after tomorrow, he said. I want time to let the council know the arrangement before you appear in the main hall. She accepted this. He could tell she accepted it as reasonable, rather than as a concession. He turned to go. She said, Alaric. He stopped. He had noticed that she only used his name when she was going to say something that mattered, that all the other exchanges were conducted without it, and that the name itself was a signal. In Dorian's papers, she said, there was a record of the curse's original target. The person it was designed for. He turned back. Her face was careful. Not closed, but careful. The way her face was when she was holding something that she knew would matter. I thought you should know that I have it, she said. I have not read it fully, but it exists. He looked at her. When you are ready, she said, I will tell you what it says. He understood that this was not a small thing. He understood that she was telling him it existed precisely because she could have kept it from him, and chosen not to. Not tonight, he said. No, she said, not tonight. He went. She stayed. The library settled around her, all those books in his private chronological order, all those years encoded in their spines. She looked at the gap she had found, the section that had stopped being added to 4 years ago, and she thought about what it meant to offer someone information they were not yet ready for. She had offered him the knowledge that the record existed. She had not told him yet that the record named his queen. She would, when she was sure he could receive it. She was learning him the way she learned buildings, carefully, from the outside in, locating the weight-bearing walls before she asked any of them to hold anything more. She turned back to her book and read until the candle burned low. She left a new one on his chair before she went to bed. In the morning it was burning, which meant he had come in after she left, which meant he was doing the same thing she was doing, moving through the spaces they shared when the other was absent, reading the traces, building the picture. She stood in the library doorway and looked at the burning candle on his chair, and felt the shape of what was happening between them, which had no good name yet but which was real, the way old stone was real, weight-bearing and structural and holding far more than it appeared to from the outside. She went in and sat down and began to read. Cora Wells came at mid-morning with the weekly treatment. The blood was easier now, not less meaningful but easier, the way something becomes easier when it has been done enough times to feel like a language both parties share. Cora was quick and careful and she made notes in her journal afterward. His hands, she said, have not bled in 11 days. Good, Seraphine said. The longest streak since the sickness began. Seraphine held the cloth to her arm and looked out the window at the late autumn courtyard. The treatment is holding, Cora said. It was not a question, she was confirming. For now, Seraphine said. Cora looked at her over the top of her journal. You are being careful, she said. I am always careful, Seraphine said. About more than the treatment, Cora said. Seraphine looked at her. Cora, who had served this king for 11 years and his father before him, who had seen grief and seen recovery and seen the space between them that people sometimes got stuck in, who had asked Seraphine on the first day what she wanted and then carried the answer back upstairs like something worth delivering. Yes, Seraphine said simply. Cora nodded. She packed her bag. At the door she paused, as she sometimes did. He added to the shelf, she said, the one that had been empty. Seraphine went very still. 3 books, Cora said. Last week. I noticed. She left. Seraphine sat for a long time with this information, with what it meant that the gap in the shelf had been filled, that after 4 years of not adding anything, he had put 3 books back. She thought about what kind of man fills in a gap when he did not expect to. She thought about the dungeon and the key on the floor, and the unbolted door. She thought about all of it. Then she went back to the library and found the 3 new books and read the spines and understood, from the titles alone, what they were saying. He had started reading again. Not to function, not to govern, to read. The way she read, which was to say, for the sake of what was in the books. She put them back exactly where she had found them. She sat down in her chair. She began, very slowly and very carefully, to understand that something was happening here that was going to change the shape of both their lives, and that it had started in a dungeon, and that neither of them had planned it, and that it was real in the specific way that things are real when they have built themselves out of truthful material. She opened her book. Outside the window, the autumn was becoming winter. She did not mind. The day after tomorrow came. Seraphine walked into the main castle for the first time. She did it simply, without ceremony, in the morning when the main hall was occupied by the ordinary business of the day, because she had learned from years of experience that the worst way to enter a new space was to arrive as an event. People treated events as things to have opinions about. People treated ordinary arrivals as ordinary. She was not entirely successful. She was aware of the change in the hall as she moved through it. Not sudden silence, something subtler. The shift in the quality of a room when something unusual enters it, and the room is trying to decide how to react. She had felt this her entire life. She had developed immunity to most of it. She kept her pace even and her expression neutral, and she walked directly to the main staircase that led to the upper library, as if she had done this 100 times. She had not, but she had mapped it from below, and she knew every turn. The upper library was 3 times the size of the lower one. She stood in its doorway and looked at it and felt the familiar physical sensation of a room full of unread things, like standing at the edge of a territory that she intended to learn completely. A young man was already in the room when she entered. He was perhaps 17, with dark hair and an ink-stained hand, and the focused look of someone who had come here for a specific book, and was not going to be moved from the task by anything short of physical emergency. He looked up when she came in. He looked at the silver on her arms. He looked at her face. He looked back at his book. "The medical history section is in the northeast corner," he said, without looking up again. "3rd row from the top on the east wall. I saw you looking for it last week." She had not been in the main library last week. "From below," he said, still not looking up. "In the lower library. You spent a long time on the gap in the east wall. I could see the outline of what you were looking for." She looked at him. He was Alaric's ward, she would learn later. His name was Owen Voss, 17 years old, the son of Alaric's late younger brother, who had died when Owen was 3. He had lived in the castle his entire life and had read his way through most of both libraries and had the specific manner of very intelligent children who have grown up surrounded by adults, which is to say he said things directly and did not particularly notice when they were unusual. "Thank you," she said. "The bloodline section was reorganized last week," he said. He always does that when something is bothering him, reorganizes things. She looked at the boy. He finally looked up. He had gray eyes, the same shade as Alaric's, the same quality of looking at something and actually seeing it, rather than looking in the direction of it. "Are you the one who left books on his chair?" he said. "Yes," she said. "He reads them," Owen said. "I have seen them on his desk. He underlines things." She had not known he underlined things. The books she had received back from him had been unmarked. He kept his own copies. "He underlines things he does not agree with," Owen said, "and things he does not understand. You can tell the difference by the pressure." She looked at this 17-year-old boy who had apparently spent years reading the margins of his guardian's habits. "Which is which?" she said. "Hard disagreement is light," Owen said, "the kind that just needs more thought. Things he does not understand are heavy. He presses harder when he has not got there yet." She filed this away. "I am Seraphine," she said. "I know," said Owen. "Everyone knows who you are. You should probably go find the medical history section before someone important comes in here and makes it an occasion." She did. The medical history section was where he had said it was. She found what she was looking for in the 2nd hour, a complete record of wolf blood sickness cases, stretching back 400 years, with treatment records and outcome data that Cora's version of the treatment had been improvised from. She sat with it and cross-referenced it against what she knew from Dorian's papers and the interaction she had been observing between her blood and Alaric's sickness. The picture that emerged was different from what Cora had described to him. Not wrong, more complete. The interaction was not simply suppressive. It was, as she had suspected but not confirmed until this moment, genuinely restorative, given enough time, given continued treatment. The wolf blood sickness would not merely be suppressed. The stabilizing effect of their combined bloods would reverse the damage already done. He could be fully healed. She sat with this for a long time. She thought about telling him and what it would mean. She thought about the map on the dungeon wall and the key on the floor, and the 3 new books on the shelf, and everything that had built itself between them out of careful, honest materials. She thought about the record in Dorian's papers, still unread, still waiting. She thought, there is an order to how things are told. There is a sequence that is kind, and a sequence that is not. The sequence that is kind starts with the good news. The sequence that is not starts with the complicated news and leaves the person trying to hold too many things at once. She marked the pages she needed in the medical history. She went to find him. She found him in his study, at his desk, with the specific concentrated look of a man writing something he had been putting off. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. She held up the medical history text. Your sickness, she said. It is not just suppressible. He waited. With continued treatment, she said, it is reversible, fully. The records here show 3 historical cases where complete healing occurred. The mechanism is the same as what Cora has been administering. It simply needs time. He looked at her for a long moment. How long? He said. 6 months, she said, perhaps 8. He held this. And the curse, he said. In the same time? The time frames align, she said. Yes. He looked at his desk. He looked at the document he had been writing, which she could see from the door was a council memo, something formal and political, the kind of writing that was the daily architecture of his position. He set down the pen. He said, come in. She came in. She sat across from him, as she had sat in the lower castle on the evening she had told him about Dorian, and the light in the study was the same quality, the late afternoon light that had weight to it, the light that showed things clearly. I have something else to tell you, she said. He looked at her. The record from Dorian's papers, the one that names the curse's original target. He was completely still. Are you ready? She said. He said, tell me. She said it simply and directly, the way she said all important things. The curse was written for you, not for me. The sorcerer intended to use me as a carrier, to move it close to you and transfer it when the time was right. You were always the target. He did not move. It was designed for Alpha King blood, she said. Specifically yours. Dorian had been tracking your family for years. He needed a specific vessel to get close enough. I was the vessel he chose. She watched him receive this. She watched the still, controlled exterior of him hold the shape of what she was saying. She watched the area around his eyes where the real response always lived. He never got close enough, he said. He died before he could, she said. And the curse stayed with me, he said. And my queen. She said, yes. He looked at the desk. She said, I do not know yet why she was part of this. The record is not complete. There are pages missing from Dorian's papers. I think he destroyed them. What I have is what he left. He was quiet for a long time. She let him be quiet. This was one of the things she had learned most specifically about him. He processed things in silence, and the silence needed to be full, not interrupted. She could feel the quality of what he was carrying, the weight of everything that connected. The curse, the sickness, the queen, the years. How much of his life had been shaped by something a dead sorcerer had put in motion decades ago. When he finally looked at her, she was ready. He said, and you have been carrying this the whole time, knowing who it was actually meant for. I have known since I was 20, she said, when I found the record. And you stayed in the estate. I needed to know the rest of it, she said, before I came to anyone with something this serious. You needed to be sure. I needed to know what I was walking into, she said, if I was going to walk into it. He looked at her for a long time. She held his gaze. She held it the way she had held the iron key, honestly, without pretending it was lighter than it was. You walked into a dungeon, he said. I walked into your courtyard, she said. The dungeon came after. Something moved through his face, not quite the almost smile she had seen twice before. Something larger than that and less safe. Seraphine, he said. It was the first time he had used her name. In all the weeks, the evenings, the library, the conversations, he had used it never. He had called her nothing. He had spoken to her directly, as if names were unnecessary between them. She felt the weight of it. I know, she said. She did not know exactly what she knew. But it was real, and it was both of theirs, and the evening light was the same as it always was at this hour. And outside the window, the kingdom was going on with the ordinary business of continuing to exist. And in this room, 2 people sat across from each other, with 4 months of carefully built truth between them, and the beginning of something that neither of them had planned, and both of them already, quietly, could not imagine not having. The dreams changed. They had been a quality of listening before, an awareness without form. Now they had form. Now, when Alaric moved through the half-built castle in his sleep, she was there as herself, sitting in the library or standing at the window, or saying something that he could not quite hear but that left him, on waking, with the sense of having been told something important. He did not mention this to anyone. He dealt with the eastern border. He dealt with the council. He dealt with the 100 small and large machinery parts that made up the daily operation of a kingdom. He did these things with the focused competence of 11 years of practice, and in the evenings he went to the library. She was usually already there. They had developed over the weeks since she had moved to the main castle, a kind of coexistence in the library that neither of them had designed but that had arrived anyway. They read on their respective sides of the room. Sometimes one of them said something to the other. Sometimes they sat in complete silence for 2 hours and neither found this awkward. Owen came and went, 17 years old and observant as a hawk, saying things like, "The Eastern chapter in that text is wrong, the dates are off by a generation," and then returning to his own reading as if he had not just casually corrected one of the senior texts in the collection. She liked Owen. She had not expected to like anyone in this castle as immediately as she liked Owen. He reminded her, in a specific way, of herself at his age, minus the captivity, plus a guardian who left him alone in libraries and expected him to develop his own opinions. "He raised you in libraries," she said to Owen one afternoon. "He raised me the way you raise something you are not entirely sure what it is yet," Owen said. "Room and food and as much information as I could carry. It worked." She looked at him. "He is not a person who knows how to be with children," Owen said, which was not accusatory. It was simply accurate. He did the best available thing, which was to give me what he is actually good at giving: books, problems to solve, enough space to develop. And that was enough, she said. "It was more than enough," Owen said. "I never went without anything I needed. I just went without some things that were not needs." She sat with this. "He talked to you about her," Owen said suddenly, not looking up from his book. He meant the Queen. He said it casually, the way he said most things, as a fact being noted. "I heard it from the kitchen. They talk in kitchens about things they do not say elsewhere. He talked to you about her." "A little," she said. "He does not talk about her," Owen said, "to anyone. Not once in 4 years." She said nothing. "You must have asked the right question," Owen said. She thought about this. She had not asked any question. She had simply sat in the room when it came up, quietly, without moving toward it or away from it. She had accepted the information when it arrived, and not tried to hold it in a particular direction. Maybe that was the right question, the one you ask by not asking. Owen turned a page. "He is better," he said. "These past weeks, I notice it. He comes to dinner, and he is not thinking of somewhere else. He comes to the library, and he reads rather than scanning." He looked up. "He has been scanning books for 4 years, reading the words without letting them in. You can tell the difference." She thought about the heavy underlines in his private copies, the things he did not understand, the pressing of the pen, things getting in. "You are observant," she said. "I was raised in libraries," he said. "You learn to read everything." She considered asking him what else he had read in the recent months. She decided it would be unfair, the same way reading someone's private correspondence is unfair even if the opportunity presents itself. She turned back to her book. The weeks continued. Cora's treatments continued. Alaric's hands stayed clear. The last trace of visible blood sickness had not appeared in 3 weeks. Cora showed Seraphine the records each week, the progression, the numbers she tracked, and the numbers were moving in a direction that no recorded historical case had managed in such a short time. "It is faster than the records predicted," Cora said. "Yes," Seraphine said. "You knew it would be." "I thought it might be. The bloodlines align in a specific way. I could not be certain until I saw the results." Cora looked at her over her journal. "Is there anything else the king should know," Cora said, "that you have thought about but not yet told him?" Seraphine looked out the window. "There is something in the curse that I have been trying to confirm," she said, "before I bring it to him. Can you tell me?" "Not yet," Seraphine said. "I need the missing pages from Dorian's papers, the ones that were destroyed." Cora nodded. She did not push. She was not a person who pushed. "He trusts you," Cora said. "I want you to know that I see that, and that I think it is well placed." Seraphine looked at her. "He trusted very few people before you arrived," Cora said. "He trusted me, because I have been here long enough that trust has calcified into something structural. He trusted Crane because Crane is loyal in the old-fashioned way. He did not trust anyone because he found them trustworthy. He trusted you because he looked at you and decided to." Seraphine was quiet. "That is different," Cora said. "For him. She packed her bag. Whatever you are trying to confirm, she said, do it carefully, but also, do not wait too long. She left. Seraphine sat in the quiet of the lower sitting room, with the cloth pressed to her arm, and thought about the missing pages. She had not stopped thinking about them since she had first found the gap in Dorian's papers. Pages removed deliberately, not torn out carelessly but excised cleanly, the way records are removed when someone knows they will matter later and wants to control that mattering. Dorian had known he was dying. He had had time to choose what he left and what he took. He had left her everything she needed to understand the curse. He had taken everything she needed to understand why. She had spent months trying to reconstruct the why from what remained. She had pieces. The curse designed for Alpha blood. The tracking of Alaric's family over decades. The choice of her as a vessel because of her specific bloodline, which carried a trace of old lineage that interacted with the curse in a particular way. But the why, the original reason, the thing that had made Dorian, in the first place, acquire this curse and spend 30 years moving it toward an Alpha King. She did not have that. And without it, she could not tell Alaric the full shape of what had been done to him. On the 32nd day of winter, Owen came to find her in the upper library with the look of someone who has solved a problem that has been bothering them and cannot wait to report it. The missing pages, he said. She looked at him. From the sorcerer's papers, he said, you have been looking for them. She had not told Owen she was looking for them. She had not told anyone except Cora. I have been watching what you read, Owen said, unapologetically. The pattern is consistent. You are looking for something you cannot find here, which means it exists somewhere else, or it existed once and does not anymore, or someone has it. She said, what have you found? Not found, he said, theorized. He sat down in the chair across from her. He was carrying a small book that she recognized from the lower library, an index of correspondence records from the kingdom's diplomatic archives over the last century. Dorian Fell had a brother, he said, older, named Conrad Fell. There is a record of him in the diplomatic correspondence from 30 years ago. He worked as a translator for a foreign embassy. He vanished from the records about 25 years ago. She looked at him. If Dorian destroyed pages, Owen said, it might be because someone else already had copies. A brother who was also a scholar. Who had access to Dorian's work? Who knew what the pages said? A brother who vanished from records, she said. Vanished from official records, Owen said, does not mean vanished in general. She thought about this. She thought about what it would mean to have those pages, to have the full record of why, to be able to give Alaric not just the pieces but the whole shape of it. She thought about the conversation she had not yet had with him, the one that Cora had said not to wait too long on. How would we find someone who vanished from records 25 years ago, she said. Owen looked at her with his gray eyes, the same shade as Alaric's, the same quality of seeing things. We would ask someone with resources, he said. Which was, she understood, a 17-year-old's tactful way of saying, we would ask the king. She thought about asking Alaric to help her find the thing that would allow her to tell him the full truth of something that had been done to him without his knowledge. She thought about the specific shape of that request. What it would ask of him, what it would give back. She thought about the dungeon floor and the key set down without ceremony. All right, she said. She went to find him. She knocked on his study door. He was at his desk, as he often was at this hour. He looked up. He had been looking up more quickly when she knocked, she had noticed. The pause before responding had shortened over the weeks to something almost immediate. She told him about Conrad Fell. She told him about Owen's research. She told him what she believed the missing pages contained. He listened. When she finished, he said, you want me to look for him? I want the pages, she said. What they represent is information you are owed. You have a right to know the full shape of what was done to you. He looked at her. And you cannot tell me what the shape is, he said, until you have them. I have pieces, she said. I will not give you pieces when I believe the whole is findable. He was quiet for a moment. Why? He said. She said, because pieces are how people reach wrong conclusions, and you deserve the right conclusion. He looked at his desk. He looked at the memo he had been writing. He looked at the window. He said, I will have inquiries made. It will take time. I know, she said. And while we wait, she said, while we wait, the treatments continue. The sickness continues to improve. The curse continues to stabilize. She paused. We continue as we have been. He looked at her. That is acceptable to me, he said. She said, to me as well. She went back to the library. She sat in her chair. She picked up her book. Outside, the winter had settled in properly. The kind of winter that was not going anywhere soon. Deep and structural. The kind that made the world very quiet. She could feel the quiet of it through the castle walls. A different quality from the autumn. A heavier stillness. She read until the candle burned low. She left a new one on his chair. She went to her rooms. She thought, before she slept, about the things that were happening that could not be stopped by the absence of a record. The treatments, the sickness retreating, the gap in the shelf that had been filled, the dreams that left her, on waking, with the sense of having been somewhere that mattered. She thought about a man who had learned to hold pain so still it stopped moving, and what it meant that recently, the stillness in him had changed quality, not less controlled, but the control had become something different from what it had been, less like armor and more like a choice. She was not certain when the distinction had shifted. She thought it had been gradual, the way most real things are gradual, the way rivers change course not in a single night but over years of pressing quietly in a new direction. She let herself feel the shape of it. She let herself be uncertain about it. Then she slept. The inquiry about Conrad Fell went to 6 different contacts across the kingdom and beyond its borders. The first response came back in 2 weeks. A negative. Conrad Fell had not appeared in any official record since his disappearance from the diplomatic archives. The contact had checked census records, tax records, property registers, nothing. The second response came from a contact in the Eastern Territories who dealt in old correspondence and private document collections. He had heard the name, he said, but in a context that surprised him, not as a scholar, as a collector. A man who lived quietly in the mountain pass settlements and had, over the last 2 decades, accumulated an unusual quantity of documents relating to old sorcerers and their work. Alaric showed Seraphine the response. She read it twice. He saved them, she said. He saved what Dorian destroyed, Alaric said. He knew what was in them, she said. He took copies before Dorian could stop him. She set the letter down. The mountain pass settlements, she said. 4 days' ride, he said. She looked at him. I will send men, he said. No, she said. He looked at her. Conrad Fell will not hand these pages to strangers, she said. He saved them for a reason. Whatever that reason is, it requires direct contact. Someone he can assess. She paused. I should go. He was quiet for a moment. You are not a prisoner, he said. You are free to go where you choose, within reason. Within reason, she repeated. It is a 4-day ride in winter, he said. The mountain passes are not safe alone. I did not say alone, she said. She watched him understand what she was saying. You are asking me to come with you, he said. You have resources I do not, she said. Safe passage, guards, horses. And Conrad Fell will speak to a king when he might not speak to a stranger asking questions about his brother's private papers. He thought about it. She watched him think. She had become very good at reading the quality of his thoughts from the texture of his silences. This one was not a refusal silence. It was a logistic silence, the kind that ran through practical obstacles and evaluated them against a decision already made. The Eastern situation, he said. Crane can manage it for a week, she said. He almost smiled. You have assessed my counsel's capabilities, he said. I have been living in your castle for 4 months, she said. I pay attention. He said, 3 days, there and back, 1 day there. Agreed, she said. We leave at first light tomorrow. She went to her rooms to prepare. She had very little to prepare. She had arrived in this castle with nothing. The items she had accumulated over 4 months fit in a single bag. She was not a person who had ever been able to accumulate. She had learned to travel light in every sense. She stood at her window in the early evening and looked at the winter courtyard and thought about what it meant to leave the castle with him, even briefly, even for a practical purpose. She thought about the dungeon and the distance between then and now, measured not in months, but in the accumulation of specific moments, each one real and precise. She thought about what she might find at the end of 4 days' travel. She thought, whatever it is, I will be ready for it. I have spent 11 years being ready for things. Readiness is the most reliable thing I own. She went to bed. In the morning, when she came down to the courtyard, he was already there. He was checking the horses with the focused attention he brought to everything. He was dressed for travel, dark and practical, nothing ornamental about him, and she thought, this is what he looks like when he is not performing kingship, still controlled but quieter. The control less like a wall and more like a spine. He looked up when she came out. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. They mounted. The gates opened. They rode out into the winter morning with 6 guards behind them and the whole cold road ahead. She had not been outside in 4 months. The world was extraordinary. She had forgotten how large it was. She had been living inside stone for so long that the openness of the winter landscape struck her almost like a sound, too large to take in all at once. She absorbed it in pieces. The sky first, enormous and low-hanging with cloud. Then the road, wide and gray with frost. Then the bare trees lining either side, their branches making a pattern against the sky that she had no map for. Because you could not map the sky from below, you could only look at it directly. She looked at it. Alaric rode beside her. He did not speak. He understood, she thought, that this moment was not a moment for speaking. He gave her the silence the way he had given her the candles, without ceremony, without attaching meaning to it, simply placing it where it was needed. They rode. By midday they were past the castle village and into the open farmland. The farmland was quiet in winter, fields stripped back to earth, the occasional farmhouse sending smoke into the white sky. She watched the landscape change. She had read about this territory in the books, the specific geography of the region, the way the farmland transitioned into the foothills and the foothills into the mountain passes. She had a map of it in her head, built from text rather than sound. Now she was laying the real thing over the map and finding that the text had been accurate but had left out the quality of it, the way things looked and felt rather than simply where they were located. At midday, they stopped at a village inn to water the horses and eat something warm. She sat across from him at a rough wooden table with bread and soup between them, and the fire at her back, and she was aware, in a way she had not been before, of how much he occupied the space of a room. Not physically, although he was tall, but in the way rooms knew he was there. People noticed him without looking at him directly. She watched this happen in the inn and thought about what it must be like to have that quality follow you everywhere, to move through the world always slightly observed. "You have been watching them watch me," he said, without looking up from his soup. "It is interesting," she said. "It is ordinary," he said. "I have stopped noticing it." "That is the most interesting part," she said. He looked at her. "You had to stop noticing it," she said. "That was an active choice. You trained yourself not to register it," he said. "It became less useful information than the information directly in front of me." She thought about this. "That is how you manage everything difficult," she said. It was not accusatory. It was, as she said most things, an observation. You assess what is useful to pay attention to, and you train yourself to stop registering the rest. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. She thought about the sealed rooms, the 4-year gap in the shelf, the things he had put into the internal storage and kept very still. "Does it work?" she said. He looked at her. "For the things that are gone," he said. "Yes. For the things that are not gone, it becomes harder." She looked at her bread. She had given him an opening and he had walked through it, and she had not expected that. Even now, even after months, she sometimes still did not expect how much he was willing to walk through when the opening was given. "What does not go?" she said carefully. He said, "The things I made wrongly, the decisions I knew, were wrong when I made them." She said nothing. "You," he said. "The dungeon. I knew it was wrong when I did it. Not all wrong, there was real fear in it. But not entirely right either. It has not gone. It sits where I put it, and it has not become still." She looked at him across the rough wooden table. "Some things should not become still," she said. He held her gaze. "No," he said. "I think you are right about that." They finished eating. They went back to the horses. They rode into the afternoon. She thought about what he had said for the rest of the day's travel. She thought about the specific weight of it. A man who trained himself not to notice things, admitting that some things had refused his training. She had been one of those things. She did not know how to hold this without changing the shape of it, which was the risk of holding things that mattered. You held them too tightly and they became something else, something that fit your grip rather than their own form. She held it loosely. She watched the road and the sky and the landscape changing around her, and she held it loosely. By evening they had reached the foothills. The guards made camp. She and Alaric sat by a fire with the mountains ahead of them in the dark, their peaks visible against the sky as slightly darker shapes against the dark, and the fire was warm, and the night was very cold, and neither of them moved away from the shared warmth of it. Owen, she thought, would have noted this. Owen would have looked up from his book and said something direct and accurate, and moved on before the observation could become awkward. She said, "He is going to be extraordinary." Alaric looked at her. "Owen," she said, "in a few years, he is already extraordinary. In a few years he will know it." He looked at the fire. He reminded me, he said, from the beginning, of someone I could not identify. It is not his parents. I knew his parents. He paused. I know now what he reminds me of. She waited. Someone who draws maps in the dark, he said. She said nothing. The fire crackled. The mountains were dark ahead of them, and the sky was full of stars, and the cold was very clean. She let herself feel the full weight of the evening, this fire, this road, this man beside her who had sealed himself for 4 years and had, quietly, over 4 months of candles and books and keys left on floors, begun to come open. She did not try to name it. She let it be what it was. Conrad Fell was not what either of them expected. He was 60 years old and small, and very precise in his movements, the manner of a man who had spent decades living in a space that required exactness. He lived in a house built into the side of the mountain, not carved from it but constructed against it, with the mountain's face as its back wall, and 3 built walls completing the square. It was warmer inside than outside, and smelled of old paper and burning wood, and the specific dry smell of documents that have been kept with care. He opened the door when they knocked and looked at both of them for a long time. He said, I have been waiting for this for 20 years. He said it without surprise and without drama. He said it the way you report a fact about the weather. They came in. He had tea ready. She suspected he had had it ready for some time. He poured it and sat across from them at his small table and folded his hands and said, He never sent you himself, did he, Dorian? Dorian died 2 years ago, Seraphine said. I know, Conrad said. I felt it. We were connected, he and I, in the way that siblings who share certain qualities remain connected, whether they choose to or not. I felt when he left. He looked at her arms. He looked at the silver fractures without flinching, the way Cora had looked at them, with the attention of someone who already knows what they are. And you are what he made. He did not make me, she said. No, Conrad said. He altered you. Badly. Without your permission, he looked at Alaric. And you are the one it was aimed at. Tell me, Alaric said. Conrad was quiet for a moment. My brother was gifted, he said, in ways that went wrong. The gift was real. The direction it took was not. He acquired the curse the way people acquire obsessions, not by seeking it but by coming close to it repeatedly, until it attached itself to him. Once it was in him, it changed the direction of everything. He paused. The curse was old. Very old. It had a history before Dorian, before the person who had it before him. It moved through sorcerers in sequence, each one carrying it, each one eventually transferring it on. It always moved toward the same target. Alpha bloodlines, Seraphine said. Not the bloodline, Conrad said. Specifically the king, the sitting Alpha King, the one with the most concentrated authority. The curse was designed, at its origin, by someone who wanted that authority destroyed, who wanted to pull the blood sickness from the line entirely, generation by generation, king by king. Alaric said nothing. It is not personal to you, Conrad said. You understand that. It does not know who you are. It knows what you are. Why my queen? Alaric said. Conrad looked at him. Because she was the protection, he said. People do not know this anymore. It was known 300 years ago. The bond between an Alpha King and his queen creates a specific biological defense. While the bond is whole, the curse cannot reach the king directly. It must break the bond first. He said this without softening it. Dorian knew this. He had been studying it for years. He calculated the moment. And the moment he chose was the year before your queen became ill. The room was very quiet. She looked at Alaric. He was looking at the table. His hands were flat on it, both of them, very still. She wanted to say something. She did not know what. She looked at his hands. You are saying, Alaric said, his voice completely level, that her illness was not natural. I am saying, Conrad said carefully, that there are certain interventions that can look natural. Dorian was skilled enough to make the distinction impossible to find afterward. I am not saying it definitively, because I cannot prove it. I am telling you what I know was in his notes. Alaric was still. She put her hand over his on the table. She did not think about it before she did it. She simply did it, the way you reach for something when it is falling. He did not move. Neither did she. Conrad watched this and said nothing. After a moment, Alaric said, What is in the pages? Conrad stood. He went to a locked box in the corner of the room and opened it with a key he wore around his neck. He removed a leather-bound collection of papers, original pages, the handwriting clearly Dorian's, dense and precise in the margins. He set it on the table. Everything, he said. The full record of the curse's history, the mechanism, the reason, the two people who designed it originally, 300 years ago, and what they wanted, and the ending. He looked at them. There is a detailed record of the ending, which is why I took these, because I needed to know there was one. Seraphine picked up the papers. She read. She read while Alaric spoke quietly to Conrad about the Eastern situation, about the kingdom, about the general state of the world, the way two people who have been given something too large to hold immediately begin talking about smaller things to give themselves time to find their grip. She read for an hour. When she finished, she set the papers down. She said, "The ending is what I thought it was." Alaric looked at her. "The curse ends when the thing it was trying to destroy is restored," she said. "The bond it broke. When it is whole again, the curse has no target and no purpose, and it burns out of its vessel." He was quiet. She said, "In this case, the bond it broke was the Alpha King's bond. His queen is gone. That bond cannot be restored." She paused. "But the curse has been adapting. Curses do. They find the closest available analog. The curse in me has been, for 4 months, in close and repeated contact with Alpha King blood. The interaction has already been changing it. It has been slowly mistaking the blood treatments for something else, for a new bond forming." She watched him understand this. "The treatments," he said. "The treatments are working for 2 reasons," she said. "The medical reason Cora identified, and this one." She pressed her hand flat on the pages. "The curse has been slowing down because it thinks it is approaching its own ending, because the bond it broke is beginning, in its calculations, to re-exist." She did not say the rest of it. The rest of it was too large to say directly. The rest of it was, the curse would end fully, when the bond fully existed. The curse would end when what was forming between them was real and whole. Alaric sat with this for a long time. Conrad poured more tea and said nothing, and was very skillfully absent in the way only people who have spent years living alone know how to be present but not intrusive. Alaric said, "The curse is tied to something I have not chosen." "Yes," she said. "And if I were to choose it, it would end the curse," she said. "Your sickness would heal fully, and I would be free." He looked at her. She held his gaze. "I am not saying that," she said carefully, "as a reason to choose it. I am telling you what the pages say. What you do with that information is entirely yours." He said, "And what you do with it," she said, "is entirely mine." They looked at each other across the small table in Conrad Fell's mountain house, with the fire at their backs and the winter outside, and 20 years of a dead sorcerer's careful damage sitting in papers between them. She thought, "I have been mapping this castle for 4 months, room by room, shelf by shelf, silence by silence. I have been mapping him the same way, and I know, with the same confidence with which I knew the location of the blocked passage from the sound of stone, what the map says." She did not say this. She said, "We should start back before the light goes." They thanked Conrad. They took the pages. They rode back into the mountain air with the papers secured and the fire they had left behind them, and the 6 guards ahead and behind kept their professional attention on the road and left the 2 figures in the middle of the group to ride in their own silence. The silence was different from the one they had ridden in 2 days ago. That silence had been the silence of 2 people going somewhere. This was the silence of 2 people who had arrived somewhere and were taking time to look at the view before deciding what to do next. She let it be that. She did not rush it. He rode beside her in the winter light, and she thought about the word the curse used, bond. Such a plain word for something that large. She thought about candles and keys and maps drawn in the dark. She thought about the gap in the shelf that had been filled. She thought, some things build themselves out of small materials, out of honest materials, out of the slow accretion of specific, real moments, until one day you look at what has been built and you understand that it has been standing for some time, quietly, supporting weight, being structural without announcing itself. She looked at the road. She looked at the winter. She let herself feel the shape of everything she was carrying, and she thought, this is what it feels like to not be imprisoned, not the absence of walls, the presence of a genuine horizon. They reached the castle in the early evening of the 4th day. The gates opened. They came in from the cold. Owen was in the courtyard, and he looked at both of them when they dismounted and said, "You found it." It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He looked at Alaric. He said nothing. He had the wisdom, sometimes, to let a silence stand without filling it. Alaric handed the reins to a groom and went to his study. She went to the library. She put the papers on the table. She put her hand flat on them and looked out the dark winter window. She thought about Conrad saying, "I have been waiting for this for 20 years." She thought about what it meant to wait 20 years for the right conditions. She thought about patience, real patience. Not the passive waiting kind, but the active kind. The kind that does not stop working while it waits. She thought about 11 years in a tower, about 27 days in a dungeon, about 4 months in a castle, that she now knew as well as she knew her own breath. She had been mapping her way to something for 11 years. She was standing in front of it now. She left the papers on the table. She left a candle on his chair. She went to bed. She did not sleep immediately. She lay in the dark of her room in the lower castle, which no longer felt like the lower castle but simply felt like her rooms, and she listened to the building around her, all its sounds and creaks and movements, and she felt, for the first time in her adult life, that she was in a place she had chosen. Not been placed in, not been locked in, not been permitted. Chosen. It was a very small distinction, and it made all the difference. 3 days after they returned from the mountains, word arrived from Lord Crane. Not a memo, a personal visit, which was unusual. Crane came to Alaric's study and sat across from the desk with the look of someone who has arrived at a difficult conversation and intends to conduct it precisely. "The council met," Crane said. Alaric waited. "Not a formal session," Crane said. "An informal gathering. 7 members. They have concerns they wish me to communicate." "Communicate them," Alaric said. "The young woman," Crane said. "The cursed vessel. She traveled with you to the mountains." "She did. This has been noted, along with the frequency of your time spent in her company. And," Crane paused in the way Crane paused when he was about to say the part that required the most precision, "the nature of the time spent." "The nature," Alaric said. "The council is not opposing her presence," Crane said carefully. The scholarly appointment quieted most of that. "What they are raising is a separate question, about what comes next." Alaric said, "Say it plainly, Crane." Crane said, "The council wants to know your intentions." The room was quiet. "My intentions are to run this kingdom," Alaric said. "More specifically," Crane said, "your intentions regarding the woman." Alaric looked at him. "My intentions," he said, "are my own." "With respect," Crane said, "at your position, they are not entirely. The question of who holds influence in this castle, in this court, in this king's ear, these are not private matters. They have political weight." "She has no political weight," Alaric said. "She has your attention," Crane said. "In this kingdom, that is the same thing." Alaric said nothing. Crane said, "I am not telling you what to do. I am telling you what is being discussed. The council is watching. Some of them are concerned. Some of them are, it would be wrong of me not to say this, actively opposed. Lord Haddon has been making the argument that a cursed woman with unexplained presence in the castle is a risk to the succession." "There is no succession issue," Alaric said. "There is Owen," Crane said. "Haddon is making a distinction between Owen as heir and the question of whether the king might, eventually, consider other arrangements." Alaric held his expression completely still. Crane said, "I am not pressing for an answer. I am informing you of the conversation." "Inform Haddon," Alaric said, "that I will conduct my personal affairs as I choose, and that the council's role in those affairs is advisory, not determining." Crane nodded. He was not surprised. He had been in this position many times over many years, carrying messages from council members who wanted to influence the king, and delivering responses that reminded everyone where authority actually lived. He stood. "At the door," he said, "for what it is worth." Alaric waited. "I served your father," Crane said. "I served your father for 20 years, and I watched him make decisions from loneliness that he would not have made from strength. I have served you for 11. I know what you looked like when you came to council meetings in the years after the Queen. I know what you look like now." He paused. "Whatever Haddon says, and whatever the council decides to discuss, you do not look like a man making a poor decision." He left. Alaric sat in his study with the afternoon light on his desk, and the sound of Crane's footsteps going away, and he sat with everything Crane had said, and then with everything Crane had meant, which were 2 distinct bodies of information. He thought about Seraphine in the library. He thought about her reading Conrad Fell's papers at the small mountain table, with her hand moving from page to page, and her face doing the specific thing it did when it was receiving and processing information at full speed, very still on the surface and very much in motion underneath. He thought about what she had said. What you do with that information is entirely yours. He thought about what he had not said. He had said very little on the ride back. He had thought a great deal. He had sorted through the pieces and found that the pieces arranged themselves into a picture he already recognized, because it had been building for 4 months in the space of the library and the evenings and the candles and the books and the conversations that had, without either of them choosing it formally, become the most honest conversations he had in any given day. He went to the library. She was there. She looked up. He stood in the doorway, the same way he had stood in the dungeon doorway for 27 evenings, and he thought, something has to change about where I stand. He came in. He sat in his chair, the one with the book slips in it, the one she never sat in. He sat in it and looked at her across the room. She waited. He said, "The council is discussing what I intend." She said, "I expected that." He said, "Haddon is opposed." "I expected that too," she said. "Crane is not," he said. She looked at him. What did Crane say? He told her what Crane had said at the door. He told her the whole of it, without editing it toward or away from anything. She was quiet when he finished. She said, "He has been paying attention." "He pays attention to everything," Alaric said. "It is his primary skill." She looked at her book, then at him. "What do you intend?" she said. He said, "I want to tell you something first." She waited. He said, "I have been thinking about what you told me at Conrad's house. About the curse and the bond and what it would take to end it." He paused. "I want to be clear about something." She was very still. He said, "Whatever I decide has nothing to do with the curse. I want that to be understood completely. The curse is your problem, and I am willing to help you solve it, because you deserve to have it solved, and that has no bearing on anything else." She looked at him. He said, "I am saying that the two things are separate in my mind. The curse ending is a good outcome that I support. What I intend toward you is a different thing, and it is not in any way caused by or contingent on the first thing." She said, "You are drawing a line." "I am drawing a line," he said. She held this carefully. She held it the way she held things that mattered. "All right," she said. "What I intend," he said, "is what has been happening for 4 months. Honestly, without pretending it is something other than what it is, I intend for it to continue." She said, "It will continue to displease Haddon." "Haddon's displeasure is not a factor in my decisions," he said. She looked at the window. She looked at the evening coming in. She looked at the library, at all the books in their years-long order, at the gap that had been filled. She said, "I have never chosen where I live or who I live among. I have been placed. I have been locked. I have been permitted. I have been assigned." She paused. 4 months ago, I was brought to your courtyard and put in your dungeon. I did not choose to come here." He held her gaze. "I am choosing now," she said, "to stay. Not because I need the castle's resources, not because the treatments are here, because I am choosing this place and these people." She paused. "And because I am choosing to find out where this goes." He said, "So am I." She said, "Then we agree." He almost smiled. He let more of it through this time, enough to be visible, enough that she could see it as clearly as he saw it. She looked at him with the specific look that she used when she was building the final part of a picture, the look that she gave the last piece of a structure before deciding whether it would hold. She said, "The council meeting tomorrow. Can I attend?" He looked at her. "It is not customary," he said. "No," she said. "I imagine not. But I have been living in your castle for 4 months, and I know more about this kingdom situation than half your council members, because I have read their files and their correspondence in your archives, and I have been listening through your walls. If Haddon intends to make arguments, it would be more efficient if I were in the room." He looked at her for a long moment. "The council will object," he said. "Let them," she said. "You said their role is advisory." He said, "You will sit beside me." She said, "If I sit beside you, it makes a statement." He said, "I know." She said, "All right." He stood up. He went to the door. She said, "Alaric." He stopped. She said, "Thank you for drawing the line." He looked at her. "It mattered," she said. He nodded. He went. She looked at the library for a long time after he left, at all the years of books in their careful order, at the shelf that had been filled, at the chair that was his, and the chair that was hers, and the space between them, that had become something real. She thought about the dungeon. She thought about 27 days. She thought about the iron key and the unbolted door and the moment she had walked out and not looked back. She had not looked back. She had been looking forward the entire time. She picked up Conrad Fell's papers and read them again, from the beginning. Not for new information this time, but to understand the shape of what had been set in motion 300 years ago by someone who had wanted something destroyed. They had not succeeded. She thought, They set out to destroy a bond, and instead, across 300 years and 11 sorcerers and a 12-year-old girl taken from a village in the lowlands, they had built the conditions for one to form. She thought this was probably the most complete failure of an original intention she had ever read about. She almost laughed. She set the papers down. She went to bed. Tomorrow she would sit in a council meeting beside a king, and whatever the council made of that would be what they made of it. She was, for the first time in her life, exactly where she had chosen to be. This was, she thought, more than enough. She walked into the council chamber the next morning and the room went completely still. Not the silence of emptiness, the specific charged silence of people who were not expecting something, and found it in front of them before they had time to prepare a response. 12 council members, all of them seated, all of them turning to look at the same moment. Owen in the corner with a junior advisor, looking up from a document. Crane at the far end of the table, who had been expecting this and showed it only in the absolute neutrality of his expression. And Lord Haddon, seated 2 chairs from the head, who did not go still, who went red. She walked in beside Alaric and sat in the chair to his right. Haddon said, "This is highly irregular." "Yes," Alaric said. "Begin." Haddon looked at Seraphine with the look of a man who had prepared his arguments for a different audience and was now improvising. He was 60 years old, heavy-set, with the manner of someone who had held his position long enough to mistake its permanence for his own. He had served on this council for 20 years. He was not stupid. She had learned from reading his correspondence in the archives, a specific kind of political intelligence, the kind that was very good at identifying threats, and less good at understanding what was not a threat. He decided to address the king as if she were not there. She found this mildly interesting as a strategic choice and entirely predictable. Haddon said, "My lord, the council has questions about the strategic situation on the eastern border, and I would request that sensitive discussions be held in the appropriate company." Alaric said, "Proceed." Haddon said, "The appropriate company being." "Proceed," Alaric said. It was the same word with a different weight, the kind of weight that ends a line of reasoning before it fully forms. Haddon looked at the table. He proceeded. The eastern border situation was not a war. It was not quite a war yet. It was a negotiation breakdown between 3 separate regional lords, 2 of whom had legitimate grievances and 1 of whom was using the legitimate grievances of the other 2 to position for his own advantage. She knew this already. She had read the correspondence files on all 3 lords the previous month. She listened while the council members presented their analyses. 3 of them had the situation correctly understood. 4 had significant gaps. 2 had conflated separate issues into a single problem, which would lead them to recommend solutions that addressed the wrong thing. 1 had the right solution for the wrong reason, which would also be a problem eventually. She said nothing during the first half of the meeting. She listened and mapped. She always mapped. Toward the middle of the meeting, one of the younger council members, a man named Perrin who was 35, and had been appointed 18 months ago and was still finding his footing, presented an analysis that was nearly right, but had missed a piece of information that she had found in the archives 3 weeks ago. She said, "The letter from Lord Aldermane's steward, dated the 2nd week of last month. It addresses the grain dispute." Perrin looked at her. The room went still again, differently. Not the arrival silence. The realizing what this means silence. She said, "Aldermane is not acting from genuine grievance over the border tax. He is acting from a grain shortage he has not made public. If the shortage is addressed separately from the border dispute becomes manageable. If it is not addressed, Aldermane will escalate regardless of what compromise is reached on the tax." Perrin looked at Alaric. Alaric said, "I read that letter. She is correct." Haddon said, "My lord, the question of what she has been reading in the archives," Alaric said, "is not before the council today." Haddon closed his mouth. Perrin said carefully, "Do you have a view on how the grain issue should be approached?" She had not expected him to ask directly. She had expected to remain peripheral. She said quietly, "Without public acknowledgement of the shortage, Aldermane cannot afford the political cost of the shortage becoming known. If the Crown addresses it in a way that allows him to save face, he will become an ally rather than a problem." Perrin was quiet for a moment. He said, "That is a more efficient solution than what we have been working toward." "Yes," she said. Haddon said, "My lord, I must formally object to." "Objection noted," Alaric said. "It has been noted. We will return to the question of how to approach Aldermane." The meeting continued. She spoke twice more, both times directly and briefly, both times on points that she had specific archival knowledge of that the council members presenting had missed. Both times, she waited until there was a natural gap rather than interrupting. She was not interested in performing her knowledge. She was interested in the problem being solved correctly. When the meeting ended, the council members filed out. Most of them did not look at her directly, which told her something about where they were landing. Crane caught her eye as he left and gave a very small nod, the kind of nod that was not approval exactly but was acknowledgement, which was more useful. Haddon did not leave immediately. He stood at his end of the table and looked at Alaric. He said, "I would request a private word." Alaric said, "My schedule is full today. Crane can find time next week." Haddon looked at her. She looked back at him without any particular expression. He left. Owen, in the corner, had been very still and very attentive for the entire meeting. When the room was empty except for the three of them, he said, "Perrin is going to be useful." "Yes," Alaric said. "Haddon is not going to let this go," Owen said. "No," Alaric said. Owen looked at Seraphine. "You handled it correctly," he said. "Not too much. Not at the wrong times." She said, "You are 17. I have been watching councils since I was 9, he said with the complete unapologetic accuracy that characterized everything he said. "I know what works and what does not. That worked." He went. She and Alaric were alone in the council chamber with the long table between them and the morning light coming through the high windows. He said, "Haddon will escalate." "I know," she said. "He has allies on the council." 3, she said. "Possibly 4, depending on how firmly Wickfield follows him. The others are movable." He looked at her. "You have been mapping my council," he said. "I have been mapping everything," she said. He almost smiled. She said, "Haddon's argument will be that I represent an uncontrolled influence in the court. He will make it about the curse as a practical risk. But the real argument is about power, and who holds it, and whether the people he expects to hold it are holding it." "He is afraid of what he does not control," Alaric said. "Yes," she said. "As you were." He held her gaze. "As I was," he said. She said, "The difference is that you examined it. People who examine their fear find it becomes something else. People who do not examine it keep making the same decision in different rooms." He said, "What does it become?" She said, "A tool, like anger, like grief. You can keep it or set it down depending on whether it is useful." He looked at the window. He said, "I set it down. The fear. I know the specific moment." She waited. "The 14th evening," he said, "when you told me your name." She looked at him. "You had not told me," he said, "for 14 evenings, and then you did, and it was not because you trusted me yet. You told me as a specific and deliberate act." He paused. "You were not giving me your name. You were giving me the information that you had a name, that you were a person who had a name and who chose when to give it." She was very quiet. "It landed," he said, "and I went upstairs and I thought about it all night. And in the morning I had made a decision that I had not consciously made, but that had made itself." She said, "What decision?" He said, "That whatever I did with you after that, I was going to do it honestly." She thought about this. She thought about the days that followed that evening. The better candle, the warmer blanket, the food twice the size, all the ways he had begun, quietly and without announcement, to do things differently. She said, "I knew something had changed. I did not know what." He said, "Now you know." She said, "Yes." They stood in the council chamber in the morning light, and the long table between them was very much still there, and the distance across it was real, and also not very large. She said, "Haddon will call a formal council session within the week." He said, "Yes." She said, "What will you say?" He said, "The same thing I said to him in the meeting. My personal affairs are mine. My council's role is advisory." He paused. "And I will say one more thing." She waited. He said, "I will tell them that I have found someone whose judgment I trust, and that it is my intention to make that formal." She looked at him. "Formal," she said. He looked at her steadily, not with the almost smile, with something more serious and more certain. "She is not yet queen," he said, speaking as if Haddon were in the room, practicing the formal version. "She is a scholar under royal protection. But I want the council to understand that my consideration of future arrangements is something I have the authority to determine independently." She said, "That will not satisfy Haddon." "No," he said, "nothing will satisfy Haddon except me doing what he wants. I have never found that satisfying to do." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Alaric." He looked at her. She said, "I need you to understand something." He waited. She said, If this becomes formal, if you make it formal, it will not be because of the curse. I want you to know that I know that. I know you said so. I believe you. He said, and. She said, and I need you to know that it will not be on my side either, because of the curse or the sickness or the treatments or the practical convergence of our situations. I want you to know that I understand the difference between what is convenient and what is real. He said, do you? She said, I drew a map of your castle from a dungeon floor. I did not draw it because it was convenient. I drew it because the information mattered and because paying attention is what I do when something is worth paying attention to. He said, and I am worth paying attention to. She said, you have been worth paying attention to since the 14th evening. He held this. She said, the name was a test. You passed it. He said, what was the test? She said, whether you would say something after, whether you would use it the way people use names, to claim something, to assert familiarity. You said nothing. You just left. He said, and that was right. She said, that was exactly right. They stood in the morning light in the empty council chamber for another moment. Then she said, I am going to the library. He said, I have 3 letters to write. She went to the door. He said, Seraphine. She stopped. He said, the 14th evening. When I walked up those stairs, I sat in my study for 2 hours before I went to bed. I was thinking about your name. She looked at him. He said, I want you to have known that. She said, I know it now. She went. She walked down the corridor from the council chamber to the upper library. She walked past the portraits of former kings and their queens, the generations of the castle's history looking down from their frames, and she thought about 300 years and the shape of what had been set in motion so long ago. She thought about someone who had tried to destroy a bond and had instead, across centuries, created the conditions for one to form. She thought, history is strange. It does not go where it intends to. She pushed open the library door and went to her chair. She opened Conrad Fell's papers to the last page, the ending, the mechanism she had read and understood and had been holding for days. She read it one more time. Then she closed it. She did not need the papers anymore. She had the shape of it. She knew what was needed. And for the first time, she thought it was not a long way off. Haddon's formal council session came 5 days later. He had spent those 5 days preparing, which was evident in the organized quality of his argument. He had notes. He had 3 supporting council members who had also prepared. He had a written brief that he distributed at the start of the session, which was unusual, and told her that he had legal counsel involved. She read the brief while Haddon organized his papers. The brief was well constructed. It acknowledged the scholarly appointment. It did not dispute her competence or her value to the archives. It raised 3 concerns: the curse as a legal liability, the question of royal precedent in regard to the presence of persons with active magical conditions in the inner court, and the third concern, which was the one she had expected and which was expressed most carefully, about the appearance of influence over the king's personal decisions. She looked up from the brief. Haddon was looking at her. She looked back at him with the same expression she had used in the first session, neither hostile nor deferential, simply present and paying attention. He said, I would like to address the council without editorial commentary from observers. Alaric said, she is not here as an observer. Haddon said, then in what capacity? Alaric said, in an advisory capacity. As the castle scholar, which is a formal position. Haddon opened his mouth. Alaric said, your brief is thorough. Present it. Haddon presented it. He was, she had to acknowledge, a skilled speaker. He did not raise his voice. He did not make the argument personal. He made 3 clean, logically consistent arguments and supported each one with legal precedent and historical reference. She listened. When he finished, he looked at the table and waited. Alaric said, are there other presentations? 3 of the supporting members added shorter points. Then Alaric said, Seraphine. She looked at him. He said, your response. She had not been told she would respond. He had not told her. He had simply created the space. She said, Lord Haddon's brief is accurate on the legal precedents. He has correctly identified the statutes relating to persons with active magical conditions. She paused. What he has not cited is the subsequent amendments to those statutes, passed 60 years ago, which created a separate category for persons whose magical conditions are documented as non-aggressive and under active management. Those amendments were specifically designed to prevent the exclusion of people from civic life, based on conditions they did not choose. Haddon said, the amendments were intended for minor magical. The amendments, she said, do not specify severity. I have the original text in the archive. I read it last month. Would you like me to request it? A brief silence. She said, the second concern, regarding precedent in the inner court. There are 4 recorded cases in the last 200 years of persons with documented magical conditions serving in formal court positions. I have notes on each case if the council would find them useful. She paused. The third concern, she said, regarding influence over the king's decisions. This is a political concern, not a legal one. It is therefore not something the brief can resolve. The king's relationships and the weight he gives to the council of various people around him are his to determine. She looked at Haddon. I understand that this is the concern you most want addressed. I can tell you that it cannot be addressed by me, because it is not a concern about me. It is a concern about the king's judgment, and you will need to take that up with him. She looked at Alaric. Alaric said, my judgment is what it has always been, exercised by me, on the basis of information I gather from many sources. He looked at Haddon. Including this council, when this council gives me useful information, including my scholar, who has consistently given me accurate and useful information, including my physician, my ward, my diplomatic contacts, and my own experience and assessment. He set his hands flat on the table. What I intend to do with my personal life, he said, is not before this council. It will not be brought before this council. If a council member believes this constitutes grounds for a formal objection, the process for formal objection is available to them, and I encourage them to use it, and to understand that it has not succeeded in the last 11 years. Haddon looked at the table. The 3 supporting members looked at the table. Perrin, to her left, was writing something in his notes. She suspected he was writing something that was not about the meeting. Crane said, from the far end, if there are no further presentations, I suggest we move to the eastern border situation, which has new developments. The meeting moved. She watched it move. She watched Haddon absorb the morning's outcome, with the specific quality of a man who had brought his best argument, and found that the ground it was meant to stand on had been taken before he arrived. He was not defeated. He was not done. But he had been outmaneuvered at every point, not aggressively but thoroughly, and the thoroughness was the part that would stay with him. She thought, he will try a different approach next time. She would be ready for it. After the meeting, Owen found her in the corridor. He said, you cited the amendments. Yes, she said. He said, I was going to mention those. I was sitting in the corner thinking about whether to say something. She said, you are 17. I know them too. He said, I read the same archive. She looked at him. We have been reading the same things, she said. Not deliberately, he said. I was curious about your situation, and I started reading what would be relevant, and I kept going. He shrugged. It is a good archive. She said, did you read the bloodline history? All of it, he said, including the section on alpha bonds. He looked at her, then at the floor. He was 17, and he was not entirely without the occasional moment of normal 17-year-old self-consciousness. Yes, he said. She said, what did you make of it? He said, I think it is accurate, historically and practically. He glanced at her. I think it explains a lot of what I have been watching for 4 months. She said, yes. He said, he has been less alone. She said nothing. He said, he has been less alone than he has been in 4 years. I noticed it very quickly, and I could not identify the cause at first, and then I could. He looked at her steadily, in the way that was both his and Alaric's, the quality of seeing something clearly. He came alive again. That is the only accurate thing I can say about it. She held this. She said, go to your lessons. He said, I do not have lessons at this hour. She said, then go read something. He almost smiled. He went. She stood in the corridor alone and thought about what he had said. He came alive again. She thought about the dungeon. She thought about 27 days of a man standing in a doorway with a candle, doing the only honest thing he had available, which was to come and look. She thought about what it takes to do the only honest thing when the honest thing is uncomfortable. She thought, he was not living. Before. Not fully. He was functioning. There is a difference. She pressed her hand against the corridor wall and felt the stone, familiar now. The whole castle familiar. Her map of it complete and accurate down to the northwest corner of the council chamber, and the echo that the high windows made in the morning. She thought about what it meant for someone to come alive. She thought about what it meant for someone to come alive. She thought about what it meant for someone to come alive. She thought about what it meant for someone to come alive. She thought about what it meant for someone to come alive. 11 years, 27 days, 4 months. All of it had been preparation for exactly this. She had not known that when she was 13, sitting in a tower with new silver on her arms. She had not known it at 20, reading Dorian's papers at the small table in the estate. She had not known it in the courtyard, or in the dungeon, or in the first weeks in the lower castle when she was still learning whether she could trust the air she was breathing here. But she knew it now, and knowing was enough to build on. She went to the library. She sat in her chair. She picked up her book. The morning light came through the high windows and fell across the page, and she read. In the chair across the room, there was a new book, placed precisely, the way he placed everything. A text she had not seen before, a very old one, the binding worn almost smooth. She looked at it across the room. She looked at the title. It was a collection of letters, correspondence between an Alpha King and his queen, 300 years ago, the couple who had first understood the bond that the original curse had been designed to break. He had found it somewhere in the castle. He had placed it there. She looked at it for a long time. She stood up and went to it and picked it up. She sat back down in her own chair with the letters in her hands, and she opened to the first page and she read. The first letter began, I have been trying to find the right words for some time now. I find that the right words keep not being enough. So I will tell you the wrong ones, which are all I have. You have made the castle impossible to leave. She read. She read all morning. The curse moved at night. It had always been relatively still in the castle's cold, the fractures on her arms quiet, the pressure manageable. But 3 weeks after the council session, she began waking at 2 in the morning, with the feeling of the fractures shifting under her skin. Not painful exactly, but insistent, the way a deep bruise insists on being noticed when you press it. She sat up in bed in the dark and pressed her palms flat against the covers and breathed. It was not spreading. It was doing something else, something she recognized from Conrad's papers, from the detailed mechanism described in the pages that Dorian had tried to destroy. The curse was reaching a transition point, the months of treatment, the interaction between their bloods, the gradual accumulation of something the curse recognized as approaching its own resolution. All of it was building toward a moment. She was not afraid. She was focused. She got up and lit the candle and sat at the small desk in her room and worked through the mechanism in her head, the sequence as Conrad's papers described it, the specific conditions and the order they needed to be met. She went through it the way she went through maps, methodically, checking each element against what she knew. The conditions were almost met. The curse was pushing toward its ending. The only question was whether the last condition would be fulfilled in a way the curse would recognize. She sat with this. The last condition was not something she could arrange. It was not something she could manage or control or map in advance. It was the one element of the entire situation that depended entirely on something outside her management, on a person, on what that person chose. She thought, there are some things you cannot build from the outside in, some things you have to wait for from the inside out. She went back to bed. In the morning she told Alaric what was happening. She told him in the library, standing, which was how she delivered important things, not sitting, because sitting implied a long conversation, and some things were better given quickly and directly before the mind had time to start turning them. She said, the curse is approaching its transition point. I can feel it. The papers describe the mechanism, and the signs align. He set down his book. He said, what happens at the transition? She said, it tries to complete itself. Whatever condition it has identified as fulfilling its ending, it presses toward it. If the condition is not met, it goes back to a dormant state, and we begin the process again from an earlier stage. If the condition is met, the curse ends, he said. Yes. He said, what is the condition? She looked at him. She said, the bond has to be genuine, not a formal arrangement, not a decision made for practical reasons. The curse is old and the mechanism is specific. It knows the difference between something real and something constructed. He held her gaze. It has to be real, she said. What it is, he said, is real. She said, I know, but real in the sense you mean is different from real in the sense the curse requires. The curse needs the kind of real that is declared, not just held quietly. She watched him understand what she was saying. He said, the curse needs me to say it. The curse needs you to do more than say it, she said. It needs you to choose it publicly, in the presence of others, in the way the original bond was sealed. She paused. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what it would mean, and what it is asking of you, and then I want you to make whatever decision you make, completely independently of that. He was quiet. She said, I want the curse to end. But not because of a decision made to end it. I need this to be extremely clear. He said, "It is clear." She said, "If you are not ready." "I am telling you," he said, "that it is clear." She stopped. She looked at him. He said, "I have been ready for some time. I have been waiting for the right moment to say so in a way that you would be able to receive without worrying about whether you were being acted toward for the wrong reasons." She said nothing. He said, "The letters. The ones I left." She said, "I read them." "I know," he said. "You left them back in a different place from where I put them. I noticed." She said, "The first letter." He said, "Yes." She said, "You found that deliberately." "I have been reading everything I could find about Alpha Bond since Conrad's house," he said. "Not for the curse mechanism, because I wanted to understand what it was that I was inside." She looked at him. He said, "I am inside it. Completely. I am not saying this because the curse requires it. I am saying it because you taught me, over 27 dungeon evenings and 4 months of libraries, that honesty is the only currency worth having." He paused. "That is yours. You taught me that." She felt the silver fractures on her arms shift. A deep, slow movement, like something turning over and settling. Not painful. She said, "Alaric." He said, "I know." She said, "The formal declaration. It has to be in front of witnesses." He said, "I know what I am saying." She said, "The council." "The council," he said, "is not the point. I will speak before the council if it is required. I will speak before the whole castle if that is required. The location is not the thing I am focused on." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "What are you focused on?" He said, "The same thing I have been focused on since you told me your name, whether this is something you choose." She said, "I told you in the council chamber. I am choosing." He said, "Say it again. Not for the curse, for me." She looked at him. She said, "I choose this. I choose you. I chose it some time ago, and I have been choosing it every day since, and I will keep choosing it, and I am not saying that because of the curse or the sickness or Conrad Fell's papers. I am saying it because you sat on the floor." He was quiet. She said, "You sat on the dungeon floor when you could have stood in the doorway forever, and I would never have told you to sit down because I knew you needed to choose it, and you chose it. And that was the moment, that was when I knew." He said, "I have been sitting on floors ever since." She said, "I know." He came toward her. Not quickly. The way he did everything, deliberately, with full knowledge of the direction he was moving. He stopped in front of her. He said, "I need you to know something before I say this formally." She waited. He said, "The Queen. I loved her. That was real, and it was its own thing, and I am not replacing it, and I am not trying to." She said, "I know." He said, "What I have with you is not a replacement. It is a different thing entirely. A different shape. It is mine in a way that I did not expect to have something again." She said, "I know that too." He said, "How?" She said, "Because you added 3 books to the shelf. After 4 years of not adding anything. That was not replacement. That was the shelf growing in a new direction." He looked at her. She said, "I will not pretend to know what that cost, but I saw it." He said, "You see everything." She said, "Not everything. I could not find the upper library for 2 months." He said, "No. But you found the blocked passage behind the northern corridor." She said, "Yes." He said, "You found everything that mattered." She held his gaze. The fractures on her arms moved again, that deep, slow shift, and she felt something in the curse that she had never felt before. A quality of pressure releasing rather than building, the difference between a door being pushed and a door opening on its own hinge. She felt it. She said, "Alaric." He said, "Yes." She said, "Now." He understood. He took her hand, not from impulse, from decision. He held it with the steadiness of a person who had learned to hold things carefully and had found, finally, something worth holding. He said, "Before whatever witness this castle provides, before the walls of this library that you mapped before you saw it, before this conversation that I have been building toward for 4 months." He paused. "You are mine, and I am yours in the way that is real and chosen, and not contingent on anything except that I am telling you so and I mean it." The silver fractures lit. She felt it through her entire body, not painful, the opposite of painful, the sensation of something enormous that had been pressing against the inside of her skin for 11 years, finding, at last, that the door it had been pushing against was open, and there was somewhere for it to go. The fractures did not spread, they did the opposite. They drew inward, the branching silver lines pulling slowly back from her wrists, from her forearms. the pattern tightening and tightening toward its center, as the curse found the ending it had been pushing toward, and moved into it. She kept her eyes open. She watched him watching her. He said nothing. He held her hand. He watched the silver retreat with the expression of someone watching something they had caused without fully understanding how, but accepting the responsibility of it. It took a long time. She breathed. He breathed. Owen, who had been in the library when they came in, and had very quietly moved to the window and turned his back, said nothing. His shoulder blades were very still. He was giving them the best silence he knew how to give. The silver receded to a point at her wrist, and then there was a moment of pressure, one clear and final pressing, and then nothing. It was gone. She looked at her arms. The skin was clear, not unmarked. There were traces, faint, like the kind of marks that deep cold leaves, but the fractures were gone. The branching silver pattern that had lived in her body for 11 years was gone. She looked at her arms for a long time. He said, "Seraphine." She looked up. He said, "Are you all right?" She said, "Yes." She said it very quietly. She said it again, louder, because she wanted to hear how it sounded without the curse underneath it. "Yes," she said, "I am all right." Owen turned from the window. He looked at her arms. He looked at her face. He said, "Good," in the tone of someone reporting a successful outcome of a problem he had been tracking. And then he went back to his book, because he was 17, and he had the wisdom to know when a moment did not need him to say more than one word. She looked at Alaric. He was looking at her hands, which he was still holding. He said, "Your blood." She said, "We should tell Cora." He said, "Yes." Neither of them moved. She said, "The sickness." He said, "I know. The bond should stabilize it fully. The records say 6 months," she said, "but the records were for cases without the full bond. With the bond established, Cora will want to check you today." He said, "Yes." She said, "Alaric." He said, "Yes." She said, "Thank you." He said, "For what?" She said, "Sitting on the floor." He said, "That was an extremely small thing." She said, "It was the largest thing." He understood what she meant. Owen turned a page. Outside the library windows, the winter was still fully present, deep and structural, the kind of winter that made the world quiet and bright. Snow had come overnight, and the castle grounds were white, and the light coming through the high windows was doubled by the reflection from outside, clean and full. She stood in the library that she had mapped before she saw it, and felt the absence of the curse the way you feel the absence of a sound that has been constant for so long you stopped registering it, and only notice when it finally goes quiet. The quiet was enormous. She felt it with her whole body. She thought, 11 years. She thought, this is what it is. She thought about the tower and the dungeon, and all the rooms she had been locked in, and all the rooms she had mapped herself out of. She thought about what it meant to be free not as an event, but as a condition, not a door opening, a settled state, the thing that was true now and would continue to be true. She thought, I am going to have to learn what I do with my arms without watching them. She almost laughed. She did laugh, quietly, to herself, at the specific absurdity of the thought. Alaric looked at her. She said, I have been watching my arms for 11 years. I do not know what to do with my eyes now. He said, there is a great deal to look at. She said, yes. She looked at him. She said, there is. Cora Wells arrived at the library within the hour. Owen had gone to find her, quietly, without being asked, in the way he managed most things, by noticing what needed to happen and making it happen, before anyone had to request it. He had the makings of an exceptional administrator, she thought. He had the makings of something rarer than that, a person who paid enough attention to the people around him to actually be useful to them. Cora came in with her bag and looked at Seraphine's arms, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, when? An hour ago, Seraphine said. Cora sat down and opened her bag. She examined the skin where the fractures had been, running her fingers along the trace marks left behind, reading them the way she read everything, thoroughly and without hurry. She said, no pain. None, Seraphine said. No pressure? Nothing. Cora looked up at her. Her face was the same face Seraphine had seen every week for 5 months, professional and precise and carrying, under the precision, a warmth that she did not always announce, but that was reliably there. Good, Cora said, the same word Owen had said, the most accurate word available. She turned to Alaric. She examined him with the same thorough attention. She checked the indicators she had been tracking for 5 months, the pressure in the hands, the temperature of the skin, the particular signs. She had developed a vocabulary for over weeks of close observation. She said, "The sickness is," she paused, "I need a proper examination. But from what I can observe here," she paused again, "the numbers are different." "Different how?" Alaric said. "Different in the direction of absence," she said carefully. "I will need the instruments in my study. I want to run a full assessment today." She looked between them. "I want to run it today." He said, "This afternoon." She said, "This morning." He went with her. Seraphine stayed in the library. Owen came back after delivering Cora and sat down in his corner with his book. She sat in her chair. She looked at her arms. She turned them over and looked at the inside of her wrists where the fractures had begun, 12 years ago, on a spring morning in a sorcerer's tower. The skin there was the same as anywhere else on her arms now. Clear. Ordinary. She pressed her fingertips against her wrist and felt nothing but skin and bone, and the pulse of her blood underneath, which was hers, which had always been hers, which had always been carrying something that did not belong to it and was not anymore. She thought about Dorian. She thought about what he had done and what he had intended and what he had not intended, which was this specific outcome, which was the complete opposite of what the curse had been designed to accomplish. She did not feel anything in particular toward him in this moment. Anger was not the right word. Grief was not the right word. There was a word for what you feel when you look back at a long damage and find that you have come through it entirely, and she did not know if there was a word for it in any of the 4 languages she spoke. Completion, maybe. Not resolution. Completion. The thing being done. She pressed her palms flat on her knees and looked at the library. She looked at the books in their years-long order, the whole chronological record of Alaric's reading life. She looked at the section that had been empty for 4 years and then had 3 books in it and now, she knew, would continue to grow. She looked at the chair that was his and the chair that was hers and the space between them where something had been building for 5 months out of honest materials. She thought about what she wanted to do with the rest of her life. This was a thought she had never before had the freedom to have seriously. She had had it abstractly, in the tower, in the dungeon, in the early weeks of the lower castle. But abstractly, the way you think about a room you have seen in a picture but never been in. Now it was a concrete question. Now it was a question with a real and open horizon. She thought, I want to finish reading this library. She thought, I want to help Owen become whatever he is going to be. She thought, I want to map every territory of the kingdom, not by sound but in person, with real ground under my feet. She thought about the first morning she had ridden out through the castle gates, 4 days north to Conrad Fell's mountain house, and the way the world had been extraordinary, how large and how various and how completely impossible to contain in a map. She wanted to see more of it. She thought, I have been preparing for a long time. Now I am prepared. She did not know what she was prepared for precisely, but she knew she was. Alaric came back in the early afternoon. He came into the library and stood in the doorway, which was a position he no longer occupied from the same angle he used to. He came through doorways now rather than standing in them. He said, Cora is certain. She waited. He said, the sickness is not suppressed. It is gone. She ran the full assessment. There is no trace. She said nothing. He said, she says she has never seen a complete healing in any of the historical records. She said, I know. The records only covered cases without the full mechanism. He looked at her across the library. He said, we are going to have to tell the council. She said, I know. He said, not today. No, she said, not today. He said, tomorrow. She said, yes. He came into the library. He sat in his chair. He picked up a book from the stack beside it. He did not open it immediately. He held it. She picked up her book. They sat in the library in the afternoon light, Owen in the corner, and the books around them in their years, and the fire going and the winter outside, and all of it real and chosen and present. After a long time, Owen said, without looking up, are you going to tell me what the mechanism was? The actual mechanism. The papers did not fully explain it. Alaric said, not today. Owen said, tomorrow. When you are older. Alaric said. Owen said, I am 17. Alaric said, when you are slightly older. Owen made a noise that suggested this was unsatisfying and went back to his book. She looked at Alaric. He looked at her. The almost smile was completely through this time. She looked back at her book. She read. The council meeting was the following afternoon. Alaric told them plainly. He presented the situation in the order that it had happened, the treatments, the mechanism discovered in Conrad Fell's papers, the the curse's resolution, and the full healing of the wolf-blood sickness. He presented it as information. He did not frame it as a victory, and he did not frame it as a crisis, because it was neither. It was an outcome. The outcome was good. The council received this in various ways. Crane received it with the complete neutral expression of someone who had already suspected something like this, and was simply having the suspicion confirmed. Perrin received it with the focused attention of someone adding important information to an analysis he was actively refining. Haddon received it with the specific silence of a man whose primary argument has been removed from beneath him. He had been arguing against the danger of the curse. The curse was gone. The argument had no ground. She watched him work through this. She watched him calculate the remaining options available to him. She was watching with the same attention she had used in the first council session, the same external stillness, the same internal mapping. He said, "This changes the question of the young woman's continued residence." Alaric said, "The question of her residence has been settled." Haddon said, "Settled how?" Alaric said, "Formally." Haddon said, "The council was not consulted on a formal arrangement." Alaric said, "The council is advisory." Haddon looked at him. He had looked at him this way in previous meetings, the look of a man testing the temperature of a decision, trying to determine whether it would change if pressed. He had been pressing for weeks and the temperature had not changed. He said, "My lord, if you are speaking of a permanent formal arrangement." "I am," Alaric said. The room went still. Haddon said, "The implications for succession." Owen said, "The succession is mine regardless of who is queen." Every head in the room turned toward the corner where Owen had been sitting. He was 17. He was carrying the gray eyes that were his family's most recognizable trait, and the particular quality of complete certainty that came from being a person who spent their time reading, rather than worrying about whether their opinions were welcome. He said, "The succession runs through male bloodline, and I am the bloodline. It is settled law. Nothing the king does personally changes it." He paused. "I have read the statutes." He looked at Haddon. "Have you?" Haddon was quiet. Crane, at the far end of the table, said, "The boy is correct." He said it with the tone of someone making a legal point rather than an editorial one, but she heard something underneath it that she thought might be the closest Crane ever came to being pleased. Perrin was writing in his notes again. Haddon looked at the table. He did not have another argument. She watched him not have another argument, and she thought, this is not the end of his opposition. A man like Haddon did not stop opposing because he ran out of arguments. He looked for new ones, but he would need time, and time, in this context, was on her side. Alaric said, "Are there other concerns before we continue?" No one spoke. He said, "Then we continue." The meeting moved to the Eastern situation. She spoke twice, both times briefly, both times on specific points where archival information was directly relevant to the recommendation being made. Perrin had begun looking to her before finalizing points, a habit that had developed over 3 sessions and that was not, she thought, going to be unwelcome to the council as a whole in the long term. After the meeting, Crane found her in the corridor. He said, "The boy surprised me." She said, "He surprises me regularly." Crane said, "He has been watching this situation closely." "He watches everything closely," she said. Crane said, "He is correct about the succession law." "I know," she said. Crane said, "Haddon knows it too. He was hoping no one would say it directly." She said, "Owen is not a person who waits to say things." Crane almost smiled. It was a very small almost, barely visible, but it was there. He said, "There will be a period of adjustment. For the court." She said, "I expect so." He said, "You will manage it." She said, "I intend to." He nodded. He went. She stood in the corridor and thought, he said you will manage it, not you will need to manage it. The difference was significant. She went back to the library. Spring arrived in the 4th month after the curse ended. She knew it was arriving before she saw it, the way she knew most things about the castle, through sound, through the change in the quality of light through the windows, through the specific smell that stone buildings carry when the temperature outside begins to change. She had mapped seasons the same way she mapped rooms, from the inside out, learning the specific texture of each. Spring in this castle had a particular quality. She could hear the training yard come alive again after the winter quiet. More voices, more movement, the sound of people who had been inside too long getting outside and feeling the relief of it. She could hear the kitchen gardens being dug over. She could hear Owen, on the south-facing terrace, talking to someone about something she could not yet hear clearly. She went to her window. The grounds below were fully alive with the specific industry of a place that had been waiting for warmth and now had it. She stood and watched and felt, in the air coming through the open window, the first real warmth of the year. Her arms. She had stopped watching her arms constantly. She had made a deliberate effort to stop, because the habit was so deeply ingrained from 11 years, that it had taken real attention to change. She caught herself doing it still, sometimes, checking the inside of her wrists the way you check a door you know you locked. But it was becoming less frequent. She looked at them now, briefly, clear, the trace marks fading further every month. Cora reported. In a year, Cora had said, they would be barely visible. She looked at the spring courtyard instead. Alaric came up beside her. She had not heard him come in, which told her something about how much she had relaxed here, that she no longer maintained complete awareness of every movement in a room. She did not need to. He stood beside her and looked out at the courtyard. He said, Owen wants to go to the eastern settlements. She said, he should. He said, he wants to assess the situation with Aldermain directly. She said, he should do that too. He said, he is 17. She said, he is ready. He looked at her. She said, you gave him libraries. He is ready. The only thing left is letting him go find out that he is. He said, he has never been further from the castle than the village. She said, neither had I. Before the mountain trip, I managed. He said, you are not 17. She said, I was 13 when I was further from home than Owen has ever been. He is better prepared than I was. He looked out at the courtyard where Owen was visible now, talking to one of the senior guards, holding a map and pointing at something on it with the precise, confident gesture of someone who knows what they are looking at. He said, he is going to be extraordinary. Yes, she said, he already is. A pause. He said, I am going to worry about him. She said, I know, that is allowed. He said, is it? She said, it is one of the permitted worries, the kind that comes from caring rather than from fear. Those are different. He thought about this. He said, how do you tell the difference? She said, fear wants to prevent. Caring wants to prepare. He was quiet. She said, you have been preparing him for years. The libraries, the councils, the access to information and people and problems. All of it was preparation. She paused. You were caring about him long before you examined it. He said, I did not think I was good at this. She said, you were not bad at it. You were doing it without knowing you were doing it. He said, there is a difference. She said, yes. But the outcome is the same. He looked at the courtyard. He said, I told him he could go. 3 days ago. I have been thinking about it since. She said, he will be fine. He said, you cannot know that. She said, no. But the alternative to letting him go is keeping him here. And keeping someone here because you are afraid of what happens when they leave is something you know from the inside is not the right answer. He was very still beside her. She said, the dungeon. He said, yes. She said, you know the difference now. He said, I know the difference now. The spring air came through the window, warm and specific. The smell of turned earth from the kitchen gardens and somewhere more distant, the smell of the river coming off the snowmelt in the hills. She thought about the village she had been taken from at 12. She thought about the river there, the sound of it, the specific green of the fields after rain that she had allowed herself to think about less and less because it had become a room that no longer needed to be sealed. It had simply become a memory, neither more nor less real than the dungeon or the library or this window. She would go back sometime, not to reclaim anything, just to see it again with adult eyes and to know that she had come this far from it. She would go back when she was ready. She thought about what ready meant, now that it was not a defensive word, not preparation for something difficult. Readiness as a state of being, as the condition of someone who had built enough and mapped enough and survived enough to be able to walk into whatever came next with her eyes open. She said, I would like to map the eastern settlements. He said, in person. She said, in person. With real ground under my feet, not from inside stone walls. He said, when Owen goes. She said, yes. I will go with him. He needs someone who has read the correspondence files. She paused, and I need to see the actual ground. He said, you will both be back within the month. It was not a question. It was also not an order. It was what it was. Someone saying out loud a fact about the future they were both going to be living. She said, we will both be back within the month. He said, I will have the correspondence files on Aldermain ready for you tomorrow. She said, I have already read them. He said, I know. I will have them ready anyway. She looked at him. He said, I have been sending you to rooms before you knew you were going. It is a habit now. She thought about the third book from the left, the one he had left on his chair in the lower library before she knew she was going to want it. She thought about all the ways he had been moving to meet her before she arrived. She said, yes. He said, it is easier now, knowing what direction you are going. She said, and what direction is that? He said, forward. You are always going forward. She thought about this. She said, and you? He said, the same direction. It turns out that is the available one. She looked out at the spring courtyard. She said, Alaric. He said, yes. She said, the gap in the shelf. He said, yes. She said, there will be no more gaps. He was quiet for a moment. He said, no. He said it simply. No uncertainty in it, no weight of what it had cost to arrive at a place where he could say that simply. She heard the simplicity of it and felt it with the same attention she felt everything, completely, with her whole body. The spring air came through the window. Owen's voice carried up from the courtyard, precise and confident, pointing at the map. The kitchen garden below was being worked by 3 people who were talking while they dug, their conversation too low to make out words but clear enough to hear that it was easy conversation, the kind that happens between people who have been doing the same work together long enough to have run out of things they need to say formally, and have moved to the kind of talking that is just the shape of being comfortable in the same space. She thought, this is what the castle sounds like when it is alive. She had mapped it dead, in the cold dark of the dungeon, in the first days. She had heard it then as structure, weight and stone and the logistics of occupation. She heard it now as something else entirely, as a place full of people going about the business of living in it, which was the whole point of a place, the whole point of walls and roofs and floors, not to contain but to allow. She had been contained in buildings for a long time. Now she was living in one. The difference was enormous. She turned from the window. She went to the library. She had 2 days before the Eastern journey and there were 3 books she had not finished and she intended to finish them. She sat in her chair. She opened the first book. The morning light came through the high windows and fell across the page, and the fire at the far end of the room crackled, and somewhere above her the castle held all its people in their rooms doing their various work, and somewhere in this same library was a shelf that now had no gaps in it, and somewhere in a courtyard a 17-year-old was telling a guard something about a map, and being listened to the way people listen when they recognize they are being told something accurate. She read. She read well into the afternoon. When she looked up, the light had shifted to the long gold quality of late afternoon, the same light that had been in his study on the evening she had first told him about Dorian, the same light that showed things clearly, that took away the ambiguity and left only what was there. The library was quiet. The book was good. Her arms were clear. She turned the page. She read. The formal announcement came 10 days later, 3 days after she returned from the Eastern settlements. Aldermane's grain issue had been handled quietly, as she had recommended to the council. Alaric had sent a private envoy with an offer that allowed Aldermane to resolve the shortage without public acknowledgement. Aldermane had accepted within a day. The border dispute had, as she had predicted, lost its fuel within a week after that. Perrin's report to the council noted the outcome with the careful professional neutrality of someone who understood what had happened and chose to record it accurately. Owen had been extraordinary. She had known he would be. Knowing a thing in advance did not reduce the pleasure of watching it be true. He had walked into Aldermane's territory and talked to farmers and merchants and a local magistrate and a very old woman who had lived through 3 different regional administrations and remembered details that no written record carried. He had come back with information that the council's formal intelligence network did not have and delivered it in a concise report that Alaric read in one sitting and then sent to Crane with a note that said simply, this. Owen had read the note and said nothing, which was, for him, the equivalent of quiet satisfaction. The Eastern situation was handled. The formal announcement was brief. It was made before the council in a session that lasted less than an hour. Alaric stated his intentions without preamble. He announced that Seraphine would be formally recognized as the castle's senior scholar, and that it was his intention to make permanent the arrangement that had been, as he put it, already established in every practical sense for some months. He did not use the word queen in the announcement. He did not use the word yet. He did not frame it as a beginning or as an arrival. He said, this is what is the case. The council received it as what it was. Haddon submitted a formal written objection, which was received and filed, which was the appropriate process, which was the end of it as a legal matter. She had expected Haddon to be harder to finish. She had expected more. She asked Crane about it. Crane said, "He is not a man who commits fully to a losing position." Once the curse was resolved and the sickness was healed, and Owen spoke in the council session, Haddon's primary arguments collapsed. He is making his record. He will not fight what cannot be won. She said, he will look for another approach. Crane said, possibly, but his primary support has been eroding. Perrin is now consistently aligned with the king's position. The three others who initially supported Haddon are watching outcomes, and outcomes have been consistently good. Haddon's influence is being built around fear, and the things he was afraid of have not materialized. She said, the curse ending. Crane said, the curse ending, the sickness healing, the Eastern situation resolving efficiently, the archive being used more effectively than it has been in 20 years. He paused, the king being less alone. She looked at him. He said, I told him, years ago, that lonely decisions are worse decisions. He has made better decisions this year than any comparable period I can recall. She thought about this. Crane said, you are good for the kingdom. She said, I am good for the library. Crane said, those are not mutually exclusive. He went. She stood in the corridor and thought about what it meant to be good for something. Not for a person specifically, but for a place. For a collection of people living their lives in the same territory, all of them carrying their own situations and their own fears, and their own way of understanding what was happening around them. She thought, I was taken from a village. I was carried through a tower and a dungeon and an estate, and I arrived here. And here, it turns out, I have things to do. She thought this was, as far as outcomes went, more than she had once allowed herself to plan for. She went to the library. 3 weeks after the formal announcement, she had a request from Owen. He came to find her at her desk, where she had been working through a section of the archive that dealt with old trade agreements, cross-referencing it against current policy to find inconsistencies. This was not exciting work, but it was important work. The kind of work that prevented small problems from becoming large ones because someone had not looked carefully enough at the record. He said, the blocked passage. She looked up. He said, in the northern wing, behind the third servants' corridor, the one you found from the dungeon. She said, yes. He said, Elric says his father's study is back there. She said, yes. He said, has it been opened? She said, not since it was sealed, not in 30 years. He was quiet for a moment. She looked at him. He was holding a candle, which was unusual for midday. He said, I think you should open it. She said, why? He said, because sealed rooms are not good for people. Because having a place in your own castle that you cannot go into for 30 years means that the place has more power than it should. He paused. You told me that, when we were talking about Dorian. You said understanding something is different from forgiving it. You can understand a room without it owning you. She looked at him. He said, I think he should open it, and I think you should be there when he does. She said, that is not my decision. He said, I know, but you could say so to him. She thought about this. She said, did he send you? Owen said, no, I am 17 and I sometimes have ideas that I pursue without checking with him first. She said, he knows this. Yes, Owen said. It is a character trait he has accepted. She said, I will think about it. He said, you have already decided. She looked at him. He said, you always decide immediately. The thinking part happens after. When you say you will think about it, you have already made the decision and are deciding how to implement it. She held his gaze. She said, go do something useful. He said, I am being useful. I am observing. She said, go observe something else. He went. She sat at her desk. She thought about the blocked passage. She thought about the sealed study. She thought about the sealed rooms inside Alaric and the ones that had opened over the last months, the 3 books on the shelf, the conversations that moved through the previously shut doors of him as if those doors had been open all along and it had only been a matter of someone walking through. She thought about what it means to hold something sealed for 30 years. She thought, it is not the same as the shelf. The shelf was something he sealed against himself. The study was something sealed by someone else's death, sealed before he had a chance to choose anything about it, sealed in a way that made the choice feel made. She put down her pen. She went to find him. He was in his study, which meant he was writing letters, which meant part of his attention was somewhere else. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. She said, the northern wing. He set down his pen. She said, Owen thinks you should open it. He said, Owen has been thinking about it for some time. Yes, she said. He mentioned it to me. He was quiet. She said, you do not have to. He said, I know. She said, but if you do, I would like to be there. He looked at her. She said, not because I need to be. Because being there is what people who are with each other do. They are in the rooms together. He held this. He stood up. He said, now. She said, if you want. He said, before I change my mind. They went together through the castle to the northern wing, which was older than the parts she knew best, quieter, the corridor narrower. She could hear the difference in the stone, the acoustics changed. The servants' corridor was on the left, the third one. The blocked passage was behind it, as she had told him months ago, as she had mapped from the dungeon floor. The stone that sealed it was not as permanent as it had appeared in her acoustic map. A section of wall, 2 feet wide, filled in carefully, but without mortar of the original quality. It had been done to look permanent, but it had been built to be reversible. She noted this without saying it. He stood in front of it for a moment. She stood beside him. He reached out and pressed his hand against the false wall. He held it there. Then he stepped back and found the seam with his fingers, and worked at it the way you work at something that was built to be temporary, and has simply been in place long enough to feel otherwise. It took 20 minutes. The wall came apart in sections, the fill stone lifting out one by one, setting to the side, the original passage behind it becoming visible incrementally, not dark. There was a window at the far end of the passage, small and high, and the afternoon light came through it and filled the space with the specific quality of light in rooms that have not been entered in a long time. He went through first. She followed. The study was smaller than she had imagined from the acoustics. A desk, a chair, shelves, with books still on them, a fireplace, the ash in it 30 years old, the window, the one she had heard through the stone, letting in the light. On the desk, a single book, left open. She looked at Alaric. He stood in the middle of the room and looked around it, and she watched him look, and she did not say anything because this was not a moment for saying things. He walked to the desk. He looked at the open book. She came to stand beside him. She looked at the book. It was not a text, it was a journal, a personal record, the handwriting different from Dorian's, different from anything she had read, an older hand, a king's hand, she thought, specific and careful, and carrying the weight of authority in the way it moved. The open page. The entry was not dated, it was not addressed. It said, in the careful older handwriting, if you find this, then the passage has been reopened, and we have arrived at something we could not see from here. I hope it is good. I hope you are well. I hope whatever you carried here you set down before you came through the door. She looked at the entry. She looked at Alaric. His face. She had learned to read his face the way she read buildings, from the outside in, the surface and the weight beneath. His face in this moment was showing her something she had not seen before, not the controlled stillness, and not the almost smile, and not the quality of someone processing information carefully, something underneath all of those things. Something that had been sealed the same way the passage had been sealed, not because it was dead but because no one had come to open it yet. He said, he knew. She said, yes. He said, he knew someone would come back to this room. She said, he knew someone would come back to this room with someone else. He looked at her. She said, he sealed it so that reopening it would be an event, not something you do alone. He held this. He said, my father was, apparently, more perceptive than I gave him credit for. She said, most parents are. He said, not yours. She said, no, not mine. He looked at the journal page. He said, I hope you set it down before you came through the door. She said, I did, before I came through the passage. He said, so did I. She said, I know. He closed the journal gently. He set his hand on the cover for a moment. Then he looked up. He said, the study is a good room. She said, it is. He said, I am going to use it. She said, good. He looked at the shelves. He said, his books are in his order. She said, I know, I can hear it. He looked at her. She said, he organized chronologically too, different system, but the same impulse. He said, I did not know that. She said, you have his hands. He looked at his hands. He said, I never looked at his shelves that closely. She said, you were afraid to. He said, yes. She said, now you are not. He said, now I am not. He looked around the room. The light was going toward evening, the afternoon shifting to the long gold quality that showed things clearly. He said, Thank you. She said. I told you to open it. Owen told you to open it. You did the opening. He said, thank you for being here when I did. She said, I intend to be here for most things. He said, I know. He said it the way he said things when they were simply true and required no further support. She looked at the window. Outside, the spring evening was full of sound, the castle coming alive at the end of the day. The training yard winding down and the kitchen starting up, and somewhere Owen's voice, recognizable even at this distance, telling someone something they needed to know. She had mapped this castle from a dungeon floor. She had mapped it in the dark, from nothing but sound and logic and the specific kind of attention that comes from having no choice but to pay it. She had known the rough shape of this room, this study, this window, before she had ever stood in it. She had known it was here. She had not known what was in it. She thought, the map is not the same as the territory. The map is the beginning of understanding it. The beginning. She had been mapping for years. She was still mapping. She would keep mapping, the same way she kept reading, because there was always more to know, and knowing was what she did. But standing in the room was different from knowing the room existed. She was in the room. She stood in the study in the evening light beside a man who had sealed something for 30 years and had opened it today, and she felt the shape of all of it, the dungeon and the library and the mountain road and the council chamber and the years, and she thought, this is what after looks like. Not an ending, not a resolution, a place where things begin from, having come far enough to stand in something that was once sealed and find that the air inside is clean. She was alive. She was free. She was in a room she had helped open. She turned away from the window. She looked at the shelves. She said, your father's books. Which one first? He looked at the shelves. He said, that one. He pointed. She pulled it from the shelf. She handed it to him. He opened it. They stood in the study in the last of the evening light, the two of them, and the castle breathed around them, and outside the spring was settling in for the season, and it was good.